Okay, we're back at it again. This is we're gotten the people together again for another gathering, another symposium, an exchange of ideas. We thought it might have been stopped because we haven't done anything for some time, but we're back. This is the first non-Sorcerer's Crusade episode we're doing in a while. But I roped in my usual victims to help me talk about things. I brought in relevant, interesting people to cover up for my own lack of those qualities. So I brought in Phil, my trusty co-host, the award-winning writer and music man and part-time popcorn popper, I'm sure.
No,
You do
actually, I can't.
everything.
I can't do popcorn, but yeah. Other than
Yeah,
that,
I mean, you do everything. You do everything. And we've got like I call him the rising star. Let's say I call him that.
Yeah.
We call Victor Kitzer, you're back here again. And today I think we have an interesting topic. It's going to be a bit loose because this is it's on the sperm of the moment, if you will, or spur of the moment, rather, episode. But we're going to talk about the evolution of the mage metaplot, we can call it, or like the way mages evolved, with especially throughout M20, but we probably will use historical comparison for a basis because I think mage as a game is probably the one that, like, not only thematically but also what it's about has changed the most compared to all the other World of Darkness games because from the beginning, you've been there since the beginning. You could tell this better than me, but like from the start, at the start, it was really technocracy versus traditions. The traditions were the plucky underdogs, and the traditions were evil. Technocracy were evil and had no redeeming qualities. Is
yeah.
this an accurate assessment?
Yes. Well, as I understand it, as I was not involved in the original design conferences for Mage First Edition. I was hired after Mage First Edition was written. I got the job while it was in layout, and then came was given. I think we've probably mentioned in previous podcasts when Ken Cliff gave me the first copy of it that come back from press, and I said, how much creative latitude do I have with this? And he said, it's all yours. We don't have the slightest idea what to do with it. So what I understand, when I first started the job, I had a lot of conferences with Stuart Wick, the original, the visionary behind Mage in the very beginning, and I had a lot of conferences with him because I asked him, what do you envision? What do you want for this? And Stuart, uh, his response was usually, well, it's yours now. What do you want from it? uh, what little guidance he gave me in terms of his vision was that he wanted it to be empowering. He wanted it to be kind of a positive uh, counterpart to vampire and werewolf, which were both very the world sucks and now you're stuck with it. He wanted mage to be about moving forward. His concept of mages, which he got, was largely inspired by the work of Robert Pirsig with Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and Lila. He envisioned mages as being the people who would move humanity and reality forward. And uh, Pirsig's metaphor for the people who moved the world forward was that it was like a ratchet, a gear and a ratchet, and the some people would turn the ratchet and it would move forward, and then it would click back into it click back into a locked position, and then somebody else would move it forward. And the way Pirsig saw it, mages mystic mages move things forward. The technocracy was the ratchet. Was the catch that would ratchet it back and hold it. And I had a I added the element of decline, the attitude, the element of entropy to that, which was, and if somebody doesn't hold it back, or if it stays back too long, it slides backwards and declines, which is not only fitting in with my own metaphysical viewpoints, but also fits my view of history, where if you stay stagnant for too long, you decline. That's inevitable.
Yeah.
Uh, Mages were the mystic mages, tradition mages were originally represented dynamism, which was moving the ratchet forward, with the technocracy representing stasis, locking things into place. The marauders, who were the ones who would basically just remove the ratchet and spin the thing around and cause chaos. And the Nefandi, I went back out of curiosity when I was working on the Book of the Fallen. I went back and looked at the Mage first edition description of the Nefandi, and they were the werewolf tie-in. They're the worm. That's essentially, it was a few paragraphs that basically said some mages are evil, they are of the worm, and that's essentially all it said. So obviously there was a lot. I felt there was a lot more to where the Nefandi could go than that. We'll probably talk more about that later, but anyway, when the original, I think we've talked about this in previous episodes as well, when the original version of Mage went to editing, Rob Hatch, who was head editor at that point, looked it over, went a few pages into it, and he went to Steve and he's like, this doesn't work. And uh, Steve had parceled it out to the other people in editing and developing, and they were like, yeah, no, this isn't working. So what they did was they had an all hands on deck where everybody, including the people who worked in the warehouse, were basically called into these marathon design sessions where they they basically tore it down to the foundations and rebuilt it in about, as I understand it, 2 or 3 weeks. Everybody was given a bunch of writing assignments, and so parts of Mage First Edition don't hold together particularly well because it was done very quickly by committee based on Stuart's and Steve's original vision. Steve Wick, also co-founder of White Wolf and also co-creator of Mage. So when Ken told me we have no idea what to do with it, he was reflecting what the situation was at that time. So what I did, the first few books, was I stuck with that vision. I mean, I was the new guy, and I had no idea. I had no idea what I was doing. I had been freelancing on Werewolf, but I had this. Remember, the company was less than 2 years old at that point. Uh, and everybody was making up what we were doing as we went along because nobody expected things to turn out the way they did. I just, my first few books, I just didn't want to get fired. This is another one of those things that people don't know about, is that Mage, when it very first came out at Gen Con 1993, it sold a bunch of copies, and then a bunch of people went, what the fuck is this? And either stopped playing or returned it. So the first 6 months, there was this boom, and then the first few supplements came back en masse as returns. At one point, I went into the warehouse and I saw these pallets of returns of Mage books, and I was like, "What happened? Why aren't they selling?" And somebody, I think it was Mike Cheney, I forget. It was this. We're talking, 1993 here, said, I don't know, I guess people just don't like it. And I went back and I had a fit in my office, and Brian Campbell talked me down, and he's like, it's okay. This comes with it. Because I was like, I'm gonna get fired. This line's gonna get canceled. I'm gonna get fired. I'm gonna have to go back to my shitty neighborhood in Richmond, Virginia, and all of this is going to have just been a bad dream. And Brian was like, no, you got this. It's okay. So what Brian and I and Kathy Ryan, Bill Bridges, Sam Chupp, a little later Al Going Back, and Judith McLaughlin and I came up with was, we said, there's got to be a back history to this, because in the original Mage First Edition, there's essentially no history. As I said, it was what was published was thrown together at the last minute. You've got these 9 traditions, plus there are these Hollow One Goth mages who were there to tie it in with Vampire, and they put in a bunch of stuff to tie it in with Werewolf, the Nefandi and the Dream Speakers. I asked where the idea for the Dream Speakers was, and I think it was Bill had said, well, they're the ones to tie it in with Werewolf. That's all the thought there was behind that.
That was a very well-developed concept.
Yeah. And so what I said was, we have to make this work. We have to, this idea of a bunch of groups nebulously floating around and boo evil Copernicus and the boo evil technocracy, this has to make more sense. And the result of that was the Book of Shadows, which I often call Mage Edition 1.5, which is where again Brian Campbell, Sam Chupp, Kathy Ryan, Beth Fiske, and I wrote all these sections about the back history, and that's where we started coming up with it. And then with the Fragile Path and various other books, Sam and Abinet eventually came in when we created the Guillotine. But we started gradually working out this back history that provided a parallel with real life occult history and real life mainstream history, and intertwined the two of them to the point where there's this massive backstory behind the traditions and the Ascension War and the technocracy and all that. And part of what came out of those discussions also was the idea that Brian and I had, that the monolithic, soulless black hats and mirror shades concept was not only really facile and didn't work particularly well, and also has dated very poorly, which I'm addressing in Technocracy Reloaded. But that there wasn't much thought behind it. It was just like, they are static, they are bad. Like the most interesting antagonists have more than that, and we said the technocracy is not the evils of technology, because as I've said frequently in Mage 20, magic is technology.
We're getting to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny, if I could jump in for a second,
Yeah.
like listening to you describe that, I fell in love with Mage from that first edition book. And it was after second edition was out, but I was an incredibly poor high school kid who could barely afford any books, and I was in my local game store, the Game Preserve I was probably 15 when I read the book. The Game Preserve in Bloomington, Indiana.
Well, fuck, I'm old. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
But they had a copy of first edition and second edition, and to me at that point it was like, well, the hardbound is more expensive. So I grabbed first edition because I knew there was just no way I could even think about the hardbound. And I looked through it, and you're right, it was a total mess. But I absolutely fell in love with just the fact that I could do anything. Like the groups and the setting. Okay, I got to the spheres, and like I got to the idea that I was working to make reality something else. And finally, the first Mage book I bought, which goes back to being, dirt poor high schooler, buying on allowance. This was before I even had my first job, was GURPS Mage, because it was sitting over with the GURPS books. I know, I have heard you talk about GURPS Mage, and it is an atrocious book, which is why this game store, like once a year, they would go through and get all the books that have been sitting on the shelf for more than a year. They'd put it on a table, and it would be 10% off for a week, then 20, then 30, then 40, then 50, and they'd go all the way down to free. It was just, we need to get rid of these books. And I bought GURPS Mage on that table at like 60% off, because I was like, this is garbage and I hate the GURP system, but like I know how D10 works for my Vampire Dark Ages. I can make this work, and I can afford $8 for this thing. It's the only reason I was able to buy a Mage book. I made my friends miserable by playing a Mage in a GURPS game, and they didn't know what they were allowing me to do. I played a virtual adept with correspondence, and when I started using first edition rules for correspondence in a normal GURPS Mage, I made everyone very angry. But and then when I got a hold of Book of Shadows and Book of Madness, those were my next two books, and suddenly it all made sense. It was my first real love. Like Vampire Dark Ages made me realize that I wanted to role play, but Mage, something about that mess, and it was like the fact that it was such a mess meant you could turn it into anything. And like, you knew you didn't have to follow the rules, because they're clearly, no one really knew what they were yet.
They were written in a week and play tested like 3 times.
Exactly. I mean, it was weirdly freeing.
That's also, I think, what made me love Mage. I always like to put it that way, that Vampire is a game, Mage is a creative exercise. That's what that's a different way I like to put it.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah?
That's a good way of putting it.
It's an amazing, creative, free exercise. And when you do that, like, I have to say this, when you play Mage, when you play Mage and you're playing in a decent game a few times, Vampire becomes so hollow and boring to me. That's because I started out with with vampire and then move on to mage, because everyone does that. Nobody
Mhm.
starts out. Nobody starts with mage as their first game.
Oh, I have a story for you later about someone who was forced
Yeah.
into that, and
Yes.
oh man.
Yes, but to move on move the chronology along, because so mage comes out. It doesn't really work because White Wolf being White Wolf, and people had to get the books out quickly at the time. But you fix it up. Book of Shadows, the redemption comes in. Luke Skywalker brings the Jedi back.
Well, it was. I really don't. I know that it often sounds like it, but I don't want to trash on or sound like I'm trashing on the original first edition crew or on Stewart. The thing is Mage. Mage is such a brilliant idea, and the core of that brilliance is Stewart. Mage is such a brilliant idea that almost 30 years in, I, who have been living with it for 27 years now, am still finding new things to do with it.
Yeah.
That's how fucking brilliant this game is.
Yes.
And the fact that a bunch of kids, I mean, the oldest person in the company at that point was 28 years old, that a bunch of kids came up with something that brilliant. The fact that they didn't know how to make all the pieces fit the first time out, that's not a criticism of them.
No.
That's just even
All the
by
first edition games
yeah.
were a mess. I have to
Yeah.
point that out. I've been
Yeah.
reading some of the first. They were
Oh
all a
God,
mess.
Werewolf first edition. It's not only unplayable, it's unreadable. Well,
Yeah.
How
Like,
different? How like because I've actually that's the only one I've not actually looked at because I've not been able to find
it's
like
it's because
it's
all the covers got torn up. That's why you can't find one. Rich Thomas came up with the brilliant yet horrifying from a retail perspective idea of having the claw slash across the front of the cover, and that meant that virtually every cover of Werewolf First Edition has been torn up because of those claw slashes. That's why you can't find them.
wow. I see, but I've heard tales, but I don't know how much they reflect reality. Someone was like that, like there were like rainbow serpent was in there or something. I don't know. Like I heard tales.
King Kong was in there. That was because Rob Hatch and Sam Chupp wrote. As my understanding, I was not on staff at that point. Neither was Bill. But my understanding is that Rob Hatch and Sam Chupp wrote Werewolf First Edition. Pretty much just the two of them, brainstorming with Mark, wrote it in like 2 or 3 weeks. And oh my God, it reads it. It's
yeah.
once
Well, and
again,
there
there's
was
a
a
great idea buried in there, but my God, it's awful.
yeah, and there was clearly a lot of love of pulp in the first edition
Uh-huh.
days. Like it doesn't come out in Vampire, but it definitely comes out in the other games.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Oh,
Well, Bill especially. Bill's a big pulp fan, and so is Rob.
I love pulp, but I wanted to get a move on because you talked about the core idea was that okay, moving things along and then it's stasis or entropy, but it's always about that movement, that evolution, that change, and I think that's been reflected in Mage. Revised, however.
Oh boy,
Oh, we're gonna skip second edition.
Well, no, okay, you're right. We shouldn't skip second edition, but I wanted to get out the usual revised rant, but let's get the second edition because Phil, you actually wrote in that. I believe that you actually wrote a few sentences.
I wrote most of it. There were a lot of people who were involved in it. Most of the writing in the book by the majority of the actual text that is in Mage Second Edition is either me, Kathy Ryan, or Nikki Ray and Jackie Cassada. There are other people credited, but most of their words were rewritten by one or more of us in order to emphasize the ideas while fixing the prose.
I mean, second edition had so many good books that some people later thought they were in different editions, like or for Survival Guide, like, oh, that's a revised book.
Oh God! Oh man! I know you all have heard me rant about this one before, but I got frustrated with a person who is no longer involved with World of Darkness because he and his friends kept repeatedly crediting Destiny's Price and Orphan Survival Guide as revised books, where I was this is an exact quote, the new age nostalgia mage guy is what they is how he referred to me. But he liked the gritty edginess of the Orphan Survival Guide and Destiny's Price, and I'm like, yeah, I wrote those. Well, I and my crew wrote those. I didn't write them all, but those were my books. Those were my ideas, and they were based on my experiences in New York City and Richmond, Virginia.
It always blows my mind how often I see people think that somehow like the revised era was where the whole street level mage thing came from and not your work. Because I've heard you talk about like your views on how mage works at the street level. And actually like hearing you talk about that has shaped and formed a lot of how I think about mage now. I used to be much more high flying mythic with my mage approach. And, you know, I'll still pull out Sorcerer's Crusade for that. But I have sort of like, I have evolved a lot on my views of modern mage. And because of my love of the technocracy, it's hard to make them totally street level. Like there's still a layer above that, but it's much more human. It's above street level, but relatable. And all of that has come out of your writing. Like that's not a revised thing that I learned that from.
The reason I brought that up, in addition to get the rant out, because I love rants, but it was also to indicate that because many people have this faulty perception of second edition not being streetwise. First, I've always had the view of it being rather streetwise, or at least oriented that way. I mean, there's always exceptions, but I always thought that the weird high flying stuff was actually much more revised territory than second edition. And I wanted your take on that. Like, I mean, mage is what you make it, but I think I always felt there was a lot of street level vibes in second edition mage.
A lot. I want to real quickly address something that Victor you just said, because this is when I realized that I had to make mage work and had to make, in order to make mage work, I had to make it sell. As we've talked about in other places, I was trained as an actor. I'm a classically trained method actor. I spent 10 years doing theater, and my feeling was that in order, the biggest problem with Mage First Edition was that it was a lot of really great abstract intellectual ideas that were very hard to hold on to. And so what I said in my design conferences was, we have to make it personal. We have to make it passionate. We have to make it human. We have to make it matter.
Yep.
And that's what the later books from about, I'd say, Virtual Adepts First Edition onward, the approach that I was taking with all of my writers was going, we have to make this human. And actually, now come to think of it, we were doing that as far back as Book of Chantries, because one of the things Steve Brown and I were talking about, and Jim Moore and I were talking about with that book, was making it about the people, not about the powers, not about the places. And something that Kathy Ryan was a huge contributor in this regard when we decided to go with the continuing Amanda story through the beginning of all of the books that started with the book of ... was to give people someone to hold on to give the readers someone to hold on to, so that you were seeing, and this explains also the approach that we took to the Splat books, seeing the world through the eyes of the people in it, not from some elevated position of all these abstract concepts of enlightenment. It was suddenly, oh my God, I've got this thing, I've got these powers, oh shit, these people are after me. And that made it personal, that made it real. As far as I'm concerned, anyway.
Isn't that a direct quote from the Orphan Survival Guide right there?
Probably, but to address what you were saying about the street level vibe, yeah, I mean, as we've talked about in previous episodes, I had just been, my then ex-wife and I had been living in one of the shittier neighborhoods in Richmond, Virginia. My family comes from New York City, and so I spent most of the 1970s going up to see my family in the bombed out, burned out Bronx. And when when I was in college, I was living in a not exactly a rough neighborhood, but definitely not an upscale one. And then when Kathy, my ex-wife, and I, moved in together, following a truly horrific experience, which she and I wrote about on my blog about the Straight Incorporated fiasco. That's a digression. I won't go down that road again. But after that, we ended up being two poor, with me poor college graduate, with her poor, high school, not dropout. She was taken out, but anyway,
Mhm.
and we ended up living in a really bad part of Richmond. And having a lot of really terrible experiences in a place we called Domestic Abuse Central. And violence was literally an everyday occurrence where we lived, and I'm lucky and she's lucky to have come out of that experience not in jail, not crippled, not with criminal records, and not dead. That's how bad those days were. When I got the job for Mage, we had just moved out of that place about 5 months earlier. So all of that was fresh in my mind, and was also the kind of the overpowering fear that if Mage didn't succeed, I would wind up back in that.
That's a good motivator.
Yeah, it
To,
really
Yeah.
was. And to put this into even more context, this was during the crack war era. This was
ah,
late
Mm,
80s, early
yeah.
90s, where Richmond, Virginia, the city where we were living, had over 300 homicides a year. And you're talking about a small city,
yeah.
relatively small American city. And um, there was a guy shot dead in the building next door to ours. There was a crack dealer downstairs. There was a drug dealer. I don't think he was doing crack. I know he was selling pot, and I think he was selling heroin, who was a friend of ours down the street. He offered me a job in his operation. I turned him down, but I would go and hang out with him and his people that were squatting in a house and so forth. So I was living this shit. Plus, I was playing in a couple of metal bands too at that point, and I was doing as
Right
much
on.
clubbing as I could afford. So this was my world. Um, when I was talking to someone who will remain nameless a few years ago, and they were saying something about uh, the gritty layer of Mage, and attributing it to Revise, and I was like, no, that was me. That was that was my world. and
Yep.
and they mentioned, I said, have you read the Mage 20 quick start with the with the homeless mages and so forth? And he says yeah, he says, and he's kind of this pause, and he says, well, it doesn't seem like you've lost your edge. And I said, that's because I fucking lived it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where
And
that comes in.
and not to make assumptions about certain people, but certain people in this case come from areas of the world where your experiences are not the norm, or at least
Mhm.
significantly downplayed and reduced.
That was
As someone who is from that neck of the woods, I can tell that while things like that to some extent happens there, not really. It's not really a factor over here in the same
that
way.
that's one of the reasons that I did Destiny's Price, which for people, for the record, Destiny's Price came out before Mage 20, rather before Mage second edition was written.
Mhm.
Destiny's Price is a first edition Mage book, not a revised book. Thank you. And when the when I had applied for the job before I actually got it,
Hello?
I had put. Did you lose me?
I can still hear you. Carl,
Yeah,
can you?
yeah, it was my internet that was being a bitch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, what part did you lose me?
That's this price for the record, not
Okay.
a revised book. And
Okay.
then,
So when I had applied for the Mage developer position before I actually got it, part of my application was I put together several years worth of a planned schedule of books that I wanted to do, and Destiny's Price was one of them. And the reason for that, my motivation behind that, was because um, there was a lot of for better and worse, a lot of the World of Darkness stuff that was coming out was trying to be very street, and was coming from people who had not actually lived that life. I wasn't homeless, thank all the gods that be. I've come close a few times, but I've never been things have never been that bad for me. But let's just say I had a bit more experience with what street actually was than some of the people, and some of the people who were writing this stuff, and definitely more than some of the people who were playing it. And I said, I want to have a book that's about what that's really like, and that was Destiny's Price.
Well, and I feel like Mage is perfect game for that, because with vampire or werewolf, like, you have access to so much power
Well, it's so
that,
much
like, why
direct
would you?
power.
Yeah, so much direct power. But with mage, and I know paradigm wasn't totally like solidified as a concept in the books in those days.
Yeah,
And I've heard you talk about like you figured it out basically as you were leaving, which was frustrating. But you know, even then, you sort of got the sense that like as a mage, your biggest limitation was yourself. Like the act of pushing outside of your world was magic. But like until you had some impressive arete, you didn't push that far out of it. You still like were changing the world within your sphere. So for me, it's really easy to imagine mages in that situation. Like, this is my world and I'm manipulating it and I'm making it better, but like I still don't quite know how to leave it yet. That in my head that works in a way that it doesn't necessarily work in the other games.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
like it does. Sorry for interrupting, but I mean, like, it doesn't really work with like Vampire and Werewolf because like Vampire is a game where you kind of require money, and because being a homeless vampire isn't really feasible in a lot of it unless you're squatting a lot, but sunlight and everything. And the thing with Vampire is like you can just slip some blood into someone's food. Boom, you're a ghoul, and you can just get them to give you your entire income. I mean, you just have to assault the banker and tie him up and blood bond him a few times, and boom, you have a new banker who can just finance you forever.
can I do that with Republicans? Oh, sorry, I said I wasn't going to do that.
But here's the thing, Phil, I'm bad because I was the bigger man when you talked about domestic violence central. I was going to make a joke about American policemen living there, but I didn't.
Oh man, that joke makes itself. You don't need to make it. You just pick it up off the ground.
Yes, exactly. But I wanted to say
Book
it.
of the Fallen. That guy's in Book of the Fallen.
Yes, but like I was going to make that joke, but I was like, no, we were going to be better than that. But you broke it. Aha! I'm not the America hater this time. Because usually I'm the first one who cracks, and everyone is like, "You America hater." But this time it's not me. I can be absolved this time. But anyway.
Sorry, go ahead.
And werewolf, like even without any gifts, you can go into the spirit world, go in, rob a store, go back out. Nobody can stop you. You can
turn into an 8-foot tall killing machine.
Yeah,
I mean.
Yeah.
Even the poorest werewolf turns into an 8-foot tall killing machine that can rip a car in half.
Yes.
Yeah, that was when I first started playing. That was really what turned me off from Werewolf initially. Is I opened the book and I looked at Krynos and I went, wait, this is like a 7th level discipline right here. You start with this? I don't know how to play that. Like, how do I play this?
That's one of the reasons Werewolf's one of my favorites. Actually, Werewolf probably is my favorite to play, but
it's your favorite to play because Mage being your baby, like you're too invested in Mage. Werewolf you can cut loose and have fun, and I mean I'm still waiting, like someone said, like when the time is right for when we can do the angry leftist game, and Werewolf is on the top of my or is on the list of games I want to use for that. When I can drag all of you in and we can play games and be angry leftists together with the characters. That's one of my goals.
World of Darkness, fuck you.
Yes, it's basically meant to be a giant fuck you to the right, and we can talk about all of those things. But anyway, not to get too I kind of lost my focus. But anyway, street level only really works with Mage. I mean, the only other game I think it really works for is Changeling, but even then Changeling, you go into the dreaming and suddenly there's fairy castles. But you can do street level Changeling. You can do street level.
Those stories are great, compelling stories. They're tricky though. Like you have to have a storyteller who really sees it. It's one of the things. Changeling is the one game where I've said like the white space that is created by that game is almost more interesting than the stuff that's in the books. Like there are these weird outlines of empty space where you go, I see what would go there. And that stuff is fascinating. All the street level for Changeling kind of lives in that white space and it's super compelling. But man, everybody needs to know what that white space looks like for it to work. And that's a hard sell.
Yeah.
Talk about the my experiences in Richmond and street level and Changeling. This section got reprinted without them talking to me about it, but I was pleased anyway once I got acknowledged. That was reprinted in Changeling 20, but I'm the one who wrote the book openers in Mage, or rather for Changeling.
Oh.
Second edition that was reprinted in Changeling 20. The thing with the first, you've got the little girl and she's like, oh, it's my birthday and all of that, and then there's the next one is she's the sullen, the sullen punk teen in the in the nightclub, and then then she's the mom with the changeling child. I wrote those back, again for Changeling second edition, and the nightclub, that sullen teen in the punk, that was totally me. I mean, that was Hard Times. That was the club that I spent a lot of my freshman year. It closed my sophomore year, unfortunately, but I spent most of my freshman year in college in that place. And the reference there to Black Flag's Damaged album with Henry Rollins punching the mirror. Like that's where I was pulling in my real life and putting it into the books. There's a lot of that in Orphan Survival Guide and Destiny's Price, and in Cult of Ecstasy first edition also. I didn't mention Burning Man in the final chapter of that, because at that point Burning Man was still a well-kept secret. I'd gone to Burning Man in 1995 with my then girlfriend, now ex-wife Wendy, and my college girlfriend, now longtime friend and former gaming buddy, Jennifer Starling, who had actually introduced me to Vampire in 1991. But she was living in San Francisco, and she had gone to Burning Man in 94 and was like, you totally have to come out here. So Wendy and I went out there in 95 when it was still small, and I put that into that final chapter in Cult of Ecstasy. And there was also some stuff with my days in fetish clubs, which was also worked into that book as well.
There's a lot of things going around. There's a lot of. But I mean, I think that, but that's. I mean, not to be pretentious here, but I mean, writing you have to do from your world, so to speak, even when it's escapism. And that's why, and it's that's the cool thing. You take your experiences, hard experiences that I cannot in any way relate to, except academically, because I'm a prick. But
it's not prick.
Well, I'm not. I'm just a spoiled douche. But there's a big difference between that being a prick necessarily. But true enough. So second edition, you give the world depth, you evolve the you take the, let's say, we could say that way. First edition for the most part was very high-minded, very abstract, and you bring it, you make it real, man.
Yeah,
that's what you do.
That's what we were thinking. That's what we were trying to do with, and that's where Nikki and Jackie and I, with that setting chapter that starts with the step out your door, and then you go here, and then you go here, and then you go here, instead of having a bunch of things. There's the penumbra, and then there's this umbra, and then there's that umbra. We did the let's start small, and you go from here to here to here to here, which is a device that I've used in almost every, actually, pretty much every role-playing game core book that I've done since then. I used it in Deliria and in Power Chords, as well as in Mage 20. But the idea of step out your door, and there's little bits of magic, and then you go over here and it's a little bigger, and you go over here and it's a little bigger. And by the time you get out to holy fucking shit, I didn't think I could imagine this stuff, then you've gone through gradually. It's like a process of initiation, which is also bringing in the occult training as well. With the you kind of first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, instead of just going, you have the power, boom.
Boom. Speaking of things that are definitely not, which are the way you described, and not you have the power, boom. This, and I was thinking about this when you talked about your experience and how you written street level and the struggles of the poor and the oppressed compared to the establishment and the rich, and similar. This sounds very Strowler. I see a lot of Strowler in Destiny's Price and second edition Mage.
Well,
and coincidentally, you're involved here. And I'm really saying this because I think Strowler needs all the shout outs it can get. So I'm doing it now. Strowler for the win.
Yeah, Strowlers from Zombie Orpheus Entertainment. Yeah,
So
obviously
Zombie
I was
Orpheus-
involved in
yeah.
it. Sorry, go ahead.
And I just, considering Strowlers is so fresh and so new, I've just comparing it to Mage at like, if you ignore all of the expansive other things that have been added to Mage, but I think Strowlers, like if you just take it like starting points compared to starting points, I think Strowlers is cooler than Mage at like from the starting point. And maybe one bit, and when but Mage has an unfair advantage of being 30 years of stuff now.
Yeah.
But still, I think that when Strowlers have had similar amounts of time, it will be cooler than Mage. Full stop. It will be awesome, and that's a nice thing. But now, not to some nice things. We have talked about second edition. I think we could talk about. I mean, second edition is an episode onto itself. Let's be honest here. But we have to get to the muck.
Well, and there's also when we've talked about Sorcerer's Crusade, but I kind of look at Sorcerer's Crusade as Mage Edition 2.5.
Oh, it really is.
There were a lot of
Yeah.
There were a lot of ideas because by the time I did Sorcerer's Crusade, I'd been doing Mage for almost 5 years at that point, and so I was bringing all the experiences, things that I learned over the course of doing this to doing the job better and better and better, and I still feel like. When I went back over Sorcerer's Crusade a few years ago and working on Mage 20, I still think Sorcerer's Crusade is probably the best thing I've ever done.
Oh,
it's frustrating because it was 20 years ago, but it still really, really holds up.
I'm not sure it's the best thing you've ever done. I think you have ascended to new heights and stuff. But I think Sorcerer's Crusade definitely by itself is the best edition of Mage. And the best edition in Old World of Darkness. I'm biased here, but I think that is also the most relevant editions leading up to M20. I think it's way more relevant than Revised ever was. So, if you want to look at the themes and ideas of M20 and the core concept of how it's changed and the core experience, quote unquote, I think Sorcerer's Crusade is the most relevant game if you want to see the transition there. That's what I want to say. But we talked about Sorcerer's Crusade a lot, and I will link it again when we talk about M20 in a bit. But we have to get to the dark. What happened? Why is Revised that way? Revised is not about progress. It's like it's literally like entropy is there, and it ignores the entire progress part and how mages are supposed to represent progress. It's like, oh yeah, no, everything sucks and progress isn't a thing now. Screw you.
So to put it into context, and first, and you all have heard me say this, but I'm going to say it again. Jess Hennig did the best he could possibly have done with what he was given.
Oh sure.
People are still trashing on Jess for that, and that is not at all fair to him.
I don't trust the people anymore. I trust what was made.
Yeah, aside from, and this just his own words, my own experience or inexperience showed through. That was something he said when we were working on Mage 20. But aside from his inexperience in terms of the rule material, everything that is wrong with Revised is due to people other than Jess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it is totally unfair for people to blame that on Jess Hennig.
And I'm gonna jump in and say a thing. I'm gonna defend the heck out of Revised, and I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna defend Revised, not being a Revised player. Like I got out of Mage for Revised. The opening of the Revised book that was like, you lost the Ascension War is over. Like it was a huge turnoff for me. But that said, when I got around to M20 and I started playing again and I got more involved in the community, everything prior to the 20th editions, I was sort of like me and my friends at our table, and that was it. I didn't get out. Mostly had to do with where I was in my life. But as of like the 20th, I'm going to conventions. I'm involved in more groups online. I have a sense of the World of Darkness community the way I didn't used to. And the thing that I realized is Revised brought in a whole separate player base. And they stripped out an enormous amount of the philosophy. They stripped out the high-minded ideals. They tried to make it just like focus on accessible role-playing game. And as you've said before, that sounds like that was all really marketing stuff and it wasn't what was right for the art. But it did create an amazing hook. It brought in a completely different community. And of course, there were wars between old Mage players and new for a long time. But I think that Revised doing what it did is a big part of why when M20 came around, the player base was so enormous. And most of those Revised players that I've interacted with have since moved on, seen all the philosophical themes, sort of evolved through the game and reached the point where they were like, oh, I actually see how this works. Whereas if that's just presented first thing, it feels like it's too much.
So what you're saying is that they have gone through their own awakening, like Mage revises Arete 1.
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, you could put it that way. But
Mage's Arete 1, and then like second edition and like first edition, like further steps on the ladder, and then Sorcerer's Crusade, and then M20. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. I mean, kind of. And I think M20 has done a brilliant job of bringing these really two groups, pre-revised and then revised players, into a single community. I won't say there's no tension left, but I feel like it feels like a single community now, which that's no small feat, but it's kind of like the descending down through, the more difficult parts of any ascension process, the purification in the middle of the Tree of Life. Like, you kind of need to go through those rougher processes to really grow. And I kind of feel like that's revised. Like,
so revised is really Odin hanging from Yggdrasil.
You could read it that way.
I mean, there's an element of truth there. I mean, as a it's almost like Jellian dialectics. Like sometimes you have to have like that clash of the antithesis and a bit of entropy in there. Sometimes you have to crash before you can soar again. That might be true. So really.
I think
we can make a positive spin here. Really, revised was the bender that Mage needed to go on, so it could ascend to M20. Like it got into rehab, and things got better, and we all grew. We all grew.
Carl, you've accomplished an amazing thing. People will randomly look at me all the time and say, wow, you're being incredibly politically correct. And I'm like, was I doing that? And this is one of the first times where I, inside my own head, went, wow, I was being incredibly politically correct.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. As a parasite I am, I burn bridges. People don't like me. I can be politically correct as much as I want because I know it's a great power of not being relevant. So my words cannot be used against me. So I can say whatever stupid shit I want as long as I'm not being mean to people. I'm not. As that, I'm not.
And you're not a douchebag. Yeah.
No, I'm not. Well, allegedly, but I'm not. Here's the thing. Like I said, I don't attack the people writing revised. I attack what was made. It's a thing. I generally don't attack creators because creators get attacked enough as it is. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
And yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And Phil, like we became friends with it. I tried to ignorantly come with a few criticisms about M20, and you were really angry because the problem is you can't listen to criticism when everything everyone else says is crap and mean and just horrible. So regardless, everything it becomes jumbled up. It's like when my mother yells at me when I'm driving. I'm like, I can't distinguish a well-meaning advice from you being panicky and weird that I stopped before a red light or something. It becomes mush, and that's what I think creators go to these days because everyone's a critic in the best and worst ways, and the problem is that becomes a mush. It becomes impossible to distinguish what's good faith, nice. Just like I had a question about this, I don't see why that was done. This is the worst thing. The feminists are ruining Mage.
That is a whole podcast episode unto itself. In fact, I just listened to it. It's the second episode of Start With This, which, if you want to create things, it's a great podcast. But I literally listened to a whole episode of what you just said yesterday on the bus home.
Oh, wow.
I think we actually did. I think actually me and Phil did an episode about this to an extent at one point. But anyway,
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
So I've just burned a lot of more bridges talking about revised. I'm sure I'm not winning friends here, but I'm making friends.
Well, here. I know. Sater's been trying to push in with one. I'm super curious about what he's trying to push in to say.
I'm sorry.
Plow over that.
Okay. Well, thank you. And first of all, Victor, you're absolutely right. And And Carl, I think your mage going on a bender thing that's a great analogy too. But Victor, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that gets lost a lot, well, I mean, gets lost, people don't know it, the context for Revised being the way that it was. For the early years of White Wolf was flying high. I mean, we literally could not put the books out fast enough. We would have people yelling at us. We were doing 10 books a year per line, and we would still have people yelling at us in conventions or calling us up on the phone, going, "Why isn't Clan Book whatever out now? I need it right now."
That's
We,
insane.
it was nuts. But by and I think we've talked about this on previous episodes, but from 1991, when Vampire came out, to the tail end of 1995, we could basically, aside from Street Fighter, do no wrong. And suddenly, the House of Cards came. It came crashing down while on fire during 1996. Partly because we had put out too much stuff, partly because the industry itself was imploding. There was the whole thing with the closing of Walden Books, with with TSR going bankrupt and Wizards of the Coast acquiring them. With Wizards of the Coast trying to patent role-playing games, which was absurd. But anyway, and with the collapse of the collectible card game market. And with Marvel Comics and their then CEO, blanking on his name anyway, but
Is it Liefeld?
No, it was his. No, he was some Wall Street dude. He was just this Wall Street raider who would come in and buy a company and then jack up the do a bunch of things, put a bunch of things out, jack up the stock price, crash the company, and leave and go buy another one. Ronald Perlman, that's it. And he was doing this with Marvel. He had previously been CEO of Revlon, and he thought for some reason you could sell comic books like you could sell lipstick. And so it's like all these alternate covers, all of these tie-in events, putting out too many titles and requiring retailers to buy them all if they wanted. If you wanted X-Men, you also had to get 6 issues of Steel Grip Starkey and his Amazing Power Tool. No, I'm not joking. That was an actual comic from Marvel at that time, and as a result of all this stuff, the industry was collapsing in 1996. We made some mistakes. There were a lot of acrimony generated during that period in-house, but also there was a lot of external stuff that was going on. So the context for Mage Revised is that after we had just gone yay, triumph to triumph to triumph, and then the whole thing started falling apart through 96, 97, into 98. I got fed up with things and they got fed up with me in 98 and I left. And so what Jess acquired and what Jess stepped into, a few months earlier, was a company that was not only in decline but had been cracked really, really hard across the jaw several times. So the downer tone of Mage Revised is also a reflection of where the company was, where the industry was, where the country was headed, and also just a combination of creative fatigue, business fatigue, and financial desperation that led to us, in order to keep the company open, we needed to sell as much product as humanly possible, or everybody was going to lose their job. So the idea in sales and marketing makes perfect sense. They said, Mage and Werewolf were trading places throughout the 90s for the number 1, number 2, and number 3 slot. Vampire always outsold everything else, and the idea was, let's make Vampire. This is I forget if it was Jess or Bill. I think it was Jess, because Bill wasn't back with the company at that point. He was still with HDI. But as Jess told me later, the idea was, Vampire sells better than Mage. Let's make Mage sell better by making it more like Vampire. They were correct, and I will say they were correct in thinking that Mage had grown too big and too unwieldy. One of the reasons I left also was I was completely burned out trying to maneuver this multi-dimensional juggernaut every fucking book.
This Hydra, if you will.
it's Mage is gargantuan, and I mean, obviously, with a 500,000 word rule book, and trying to please everybody while also keeping the books, within a certain within an affordable production range and within deadline was literally driving me crazy. And so what the idea that sales and marketing and also management had was to strip out a lot of the things that made Mage so unwieldy and intimidating, and make it more street level by saying you can't go in the Umbra anymore. Fuck you. They also tied that in with Wraith, but that's a whole other digression there. But in any case, the decision to strip so many elements out of Mage was made in large part in large part thanks to the both the colossal epic size that Mage had grown to, and the need to not only make it sell better but to attract new players to it. And in that case, Victor is absolutely right. It did the job there, and I think on a lot of levels it did it well. A lot of people assume that I hate Mage Revised, and I don't. Especially when I went through the revised books while working on 20th anniversary, I was like, this is better than I had been led to expect. I stopped reading Mage. I stopped having anything to do with Mage except for when I came in to work on the revised edition of Order of Hermes, the Order of Hermes tradition book. I stepped away from it because I was so burned out and fed up with White Wolf and the World of Darkness at that point that I just plain didn't want anything to do with it at all after 2000. So that when I went back and I reread the revised books, I'm like, I have this issue with contradictory rules, and I have this issue and this issue, which I've already addressed in Mage 20, with certain suppositions that were forced down Jess's throat by people who'd never read Mage. Other than that, I think there are a lot of really good things about Mage Revised, and I played those up and incorporated them into Mage 20. And as far as bringing both the revised fans and the pre-revised fans together, that was what, and we've talked about this on other episodes as well. But when Rich Thomas and I first talked about Mage 20, we both agreed we wanted a Mage for all Mage fans, and that's the balance that I have been walking with Mage 20 for the last few years, has been to please Mage fans, to please myself and please my various number of publishers at this point, and to keep it being artistically viable, as well as keeping it selling, to make it so that Mage stays relevant rather than being being a nostalgia time capsule of the 1990s.
Yeah.
To make it a game for now. That was another phrase that came up during our discussions, was Mage 20 needs to be a game for now, and I think
Yeah.
that probably brings us up to what you were
That-
you were wanted next wanted to address.
That's what the next one to address, but I wanted a few side comments. Speaking of the downer context, I'm very glad that the new edition of Mage was not made now, because
Yeah, M20 got in like right under, because if it had come out 2 years later, man.
Fuck.
I mean,
Oh, man.
So
Yeah.
you'll say now that would have influenced you creatively. Phil, that's what you're saying.
Well, and I mean, speaking even to some of the other books that are coming out, I won't share any details, obviously, but I wrote a few sections for Victorian Mage, and yeah, it's a time period piece, but there are some opinions I have about right now that are in that word count.
Yeah.
Yes, and not to spoil anything, because I don't write, but I was at one point in a brain trust. I in one of the upcoming books, Phil, you could say that there's some of those thoughts from the current times there.
Oh yeah. Well,
Yes.
you can't not. You can't. Well, one of
Yeah.
the things, and to address your overall topic here, one of the things that has been essential for me, not only with Mage but with my work in general, is keeping it relevant,
Yes.
and that has meant on a lot of levels with Mage 20, addressing addressing discussions and cultural conversations and technologies and changes that are occurring right now that didn't even exist in the 1990s. And to one of the things that I've said a lot in Mage 20 and about Mage 20 is that Mage has always been about defining your reality. Well, right now we're in the middle of a real life reality war. The idea of defining reality through whether it's either through tricks or illusions or misdirections or technology or whatever, that's a
Or
real
branding.
yeah, that's on a number of levels. It's always been true, but with the internet, with social media, with YouTube, with Fox News, and all of that sort of thing, it is possible on a level now that was inconceivable in the 1990s.
I want
That
to use
had
a,
to be addressed.
I want to use an example of this, of the reality war, and it's just a concept of climate change. That
Yeah, exactly.
it's a divisive concept, which is silly in and of itself, but due to the people talking here. But I was watching this clip. I was watching this great video actually, but in it was a clip where a certain guy, I call him the weasel, the guy, the punchable face,
Mhm.
is another one of the many milkshakes targets in the future, I hope. Ben Shapiro, he talked about like, oh, let's say the water level rising is true. Don't you think that all of those people would just sell their homes and move away?
Yeah, because
Sell
who's
them?
gonna
No,
buy? Oh yeah, I'm
Yes.
gonna
yeah,
buy this land that's gonna go away. Like, I don't.
yeah.
How do you like? I understand things like Bush Senior not knowing what a gallon of milk costs. It's ridiculous, and it shows he's out of touch. But like, I get how you could be that out of touch. I don't understand how anyone who has touched a dollar bill could be like, I have this useless thing. I guess I'll just sell it and think that's a thing. Like,
So,
But
so I can,
my
I,
point. Sorry.
mhm.
Go ahead.
I can actually address that from personal experience. When I was living in San Francisco, I was briefly dating a multimillionaire. She was an heir of a shipbuilding fortune, and she had an estate in Tiburon. She had an estate in Maui. She had properties all over the country. She's a very very good person. I wouldn't have dated her if she wasn't. And she's a philanthropist. She uses her money for a lot of good things. But despite being a philanthropist, and despite having friends and briefly dating somebody like me, who at that point was very financially desperate, and trying not to bring that into the relationship, she could not conceive. Like at one point, there was a thing she was doing in Maui, and she's like, "We can come with me to Maui." I'm like, "I don't have the money for that plane ticket." And she's like, "Oh, it's only $300." I'm like, "No, you don't understand that. I don't have $300 I can spare." And she's like, "Well, that's not much money." And then she offered to pay me for it. And I'm like, she offered to pay to buy my ticket for me. I'm like, "No, the point is here is that you don't understand what I'm living like. You don't understand what that's like," which is another thing that I bring into my work a lot, the idea of trying to get people to understand what other people's lives are like. But it isn't that she was being mean. It wasn't that she was
Oh,
being callous. It's she literally had no idea what it was like to not be able to afford a $300 something.
yeah.
And I've met a lot of people like that. And
Yeah.
for some of these people, well, you can just sell it off and somebody will buy it. That's what they do. That's what their world is like. So they can't conceive of the why would anybody buy this?
Yes. Okay. In general, I agree with you. In case of Ben Shapiro, no, there's this malicious reality warfare going on because
Oh
there are
yeah.
people who see that argument and are like, yes, this is very logical. This is a logic
Hmm.
man. Facts don't care about feelings.
Yeah.
But okay, I post a
There's
lot of
definitely
memes.
malice involved.
Yes, I post a lot of guillotine memes and eat your words memes. You know this. I want to
Yeah.
write a paper about how differently cultural consider the guillotine is compared to other weapons of execution or
Yeah.
methods of execution, but that's not the point. I think that would be interesting. Anyway, I know a lot of the. I know people who are millionaire. I do because of random
Mhm.
chance, really. And I would say that all of the super rich people I met in my life are really cool. They're awesome, nice people. So my animosity towards it has never been personal because a lot of the really, really are cool, nice people for the most part. It's just that their worldview is so removed. Like, I mean, that's what you made a point about the Syndicate. Syndicate archmages don't live in the Umbra; they live in mansions or
No, exactly.
apartment.
Yeah.
And I've taken that concept in my games. I apply that to the entire technocracy. I don't have, except Void Engineers. don't have any of them living in the Umbra. I can just, because as an academic, that's the best phrase I can. I have met some academics and how alien their thoughts are, and it's fascinating. So I'm like, because in my home brood mage, there are humanities technocrats.
Yes, we all know.
We all know. And I have them like they're really alien humanities people and weird ass engineers and shit. And they don't live in the Umbra; they're just here but removed. And that is wealth does that more than anything. Wealth is the biggest worldview changer. It
is, but one thing that kind of stands out to me between the story what you just said and then what Phil was talking about is I have a bizarre previous life experience that I didn't realize was bizarre until I became an adult, in that I grew up and my immediate family was financially very, very poor. We had very little money. But my extended family, like, we came from societal privilege, but I didn't understand that, at least on my father's side. So I grew up, and my mother worked at Indiana University, Big Ten school, in the journalism department. So, like, we didn't have money, but I got to go in there, and I was given free video games that they downloaded off this internet thing that didn't exist yet, but they had access to because university, and I got to take them home and play them. And, like, when I missed the chapter on factoring because of moving between Texas and Indiana, and I'm in algebra, I missed factoring. My last day in Texas was the first day of the factoring chapter. My first day in Indiana was the factoring test. If you know anything about algebra, that is a recipe for failure. My grandmother was a lifelong math teacher, so I got free tutoring, and by the last semester I was getting A's again. And but we were poor. And then when I was going to college, my parents worked for IU, so I got the discounts, and I had extended relatives helping, and none of that clicked as privilege until I got out of college. And my boyfriend then, now my husband, was just starting college, and he was a first generation college student. And I'm like, oh, why would that matter? Oh God. When I got into it and I started helping him with things, and suddenly the 1 a.m. sessions with my parents where they found out I'd slacked on a paper, and they were like, oh, you slacked on the paper? No, we're dragging you through the full 2-round editorial process tonight because it's due tomorrow. And that's your punishment. And you're going to get an A on this paper. And I just thought they were being obnoxious. It's weird what's powerful, what's privileged, what skews your worldview. I went through 5 or 6 years of my friends smacking me upside the head, being like, your perspective doesn't work anywhere else.
Yeah,
so there are weird hidden versions of that.
There are loads of hidden. I mean, I live in that bubble myself. The only thing is that due to the internet and being academically inclined, I know that my perspective doesn't really work anywhere else. That's the thing, is Clash Royale. We're the traditions right here. We have Phil. I think you're the ecstatic here.
I'm definitely the ecstatic.
I don't know what tradition I am, but Victor, you're the VA, except you don't suck. So
VA, not VI.
Well, and actually, going back to some folks who will remain nameless, but who have definitely demonstrated a disconnection from the cultural discussions in the United States, because in Scandinavian countries you don't have the cultural issues that are huge in the States. I mean, people are getting killed. Look at yesterday, that people are getting killed about on a daily basis in this fucking country. Are inconceivable in large parts of the large parts of the world in general, but in particular in that particular
over here
in the Scandinavian offices there, where these things are all just abstract, deep, neato-cool things that you can put into a book, not things people have actually lived and died by.
It's the thing of in Scandinavia, Trump is still funny here. Like nobody's like laughing with him, but laughing at Trump is still funny here.
I
People are
miss
like,
being able to laugh at him. Like years and years and years ago, there was a brief period when he first started running where I'm like, "This is hilarious." It didn't last long enough.
here's the thing. I was actually very lucky because I watched Young Turks, and I watched one video where people were like, "Why are people making fun of Trump?" He's just like when they were interviewing people, and they're like, and people were like college students and everyone were like, "Oh, why are people making fun of Trump? He just wants to make America great again." I'm like, you don't seriously think he can do that? And I'm like, wait, they think that? Which
yes, half of
that,
America thinks that.
Yeah, but I'm talking like early 2015 when he just started running. Early on, and I saw that people actually took what he said seriously, and I was like, this is a serious campaign. I mean, not from his end, but on the believers' end. These are people who actually believe this, and that was shocking to me. But like, just to use an example of as someone living in the Scandinavian lands, people who want to go and get an abortion here, okay, they do not have to look at fetus pictures. They do not have like protest crowds they have to walk through, yelling at them and that they're murderers just because they want to go in and check something else. But the abortions are done there. So we don't have any of that. Nothing like that happens. Like I've been to the hospital a few times in my life. I've never been to the hospital for more than an hour. Like when it's been like a treatment thing. Inconceivable to most Americans. Like I've never been there for more than an hour if it's been myself. Like even when I got hit by a car and flew over it and landed on my knees and everything. Wow. Never. Loads of small things and big things, but small things that just don't work that way. People. If I cut myself really bad, I don't have to be like, oh shit, this is gonna cost me.
This is gonna bankrupt me. Yeah.
This is not. Or if I get cancer, I do not have to worry about this bankrupting my entire family line for years.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'll step that one back because I don't want to embarrass anybody. I'll put this more in the context of my old coworker Zach, who I've talked about at various times and written about. He and I worked together at Barnes and Noble in 2005 and 2006, and he was a college kid, 23, 24 years old, hard worker. He was going to school, shared an apartment with two other guys, and this is in Asheville where it's. I'm not going to go down that digression. Let's just say they paid us really badly. But he was sharing a place. He had another job, but he was working two jobs, and neither one of them provided health care. Now, in the United States, if you don't have health insurance, going to the emergency room, going to the emergency room will cost you literally more than you make in a month. And when he started coughing a lot, and people were like, dude, go to the doctor. And he's like, I can't afford to go to the doctor. He's like, I'm young. He's young, strong. He's gonna tough it out and all that. He has no reason to think that he couldn't, except that what he had was a respiratory infection that got so bad that one day he died of it. And he didn't come into work. And we were like, dude, this isn't like Zach. And so they called and finally got hold of one of his roommates, because one of our coworkers was friends with his roommates, and called his roommate. And the roommate went home. He's dead in the shower. He had a coughing fit in the shower, and I don't know whether it was the infection that killed him or whether it was inhaling water from the coughing fit in the shower, but he was dead in the shower, 23, 24 years old, because he had two jobs, was going to college, was doing everything he was supposed to do, and neither one of those goddamn fucking jobs would pay enough for him to go to see a goddamn doctor. And if he had gone to see that goddamn doctor and that doctor had told him to take a week off, he'd have been fired from those jobs, because you don't take a week off when you work at that level. You don't have your job waiting for you if you need, no matter how sick you are, especially if you live in the goddamn South, and that's another whole tangent. But you don't have your job waiting for you if you work at that level, at that job. So at that point, you have spent more than you make in a month. Then you have to buy the medicine, and that'll cost you most of what you made in a month. And then then the doctor says stay home, so you don't have a job to pay for it. So you're like 2 or 3 months behind on your income. You are suddenly wildly in debt, and you lost one or both of your jobs. where do you go? So Zach did what a lot of Americans do. He toughed it out and he died. And that
Yeah.
is the way that things work in this country, and it is absolutely morally wrong. It
It's
is not only morally wrong, it is from a societal standpoint, it is suicide. It is
Yes.
not the mark of a strong, great society. It is the mark of a society that is being drained by its parasitical institutions. And I will now get off that rant, but obviously that was 2006. I'm obviously still furious
It's still
about that.
curious. I'm curious about that. Contra 2019, and yeah, this is a thing. Over here, regardless, you could be completely working class. You could be the biggest working stiff, paid vacations, free healthcare. If anyone fires you for taking a week off due to medical reasons, that business is fucked. They are so like there's like retail unions here. Like everyone, like not everyone's in a union,
Yeah.
but unions exist for every job, and even if you aren't
Mhm.
in one, they have done so much for you that
Mhm.
you coast off just passive protection due to that. And so I'm like,
Mhm.
that's just
Well,
a contrasting thing.
And I mean, the thing is that used to be true in America
Yes,
once
but then
upon a time. I mean, there are a lot of things we've
Yeah.
never had, but we
Mhm.
used to have unions. My grandfather, who was a dyed in the wool, lifelong Republican. I mean, he fought in World War II, so we're talking about a lifespan that was a very different version of Republican.
Yeah.
But like at the end of his life, my grandparents were listening to Rush Limbaugh daily. Like they were making the transition in the early days of that transition to modern republicanism. But he was also a lifelong union steward
Yeah.
at Bendix. I mean, he wasn't just in a union, he was a steward. And my mother was a union steward, and my mother was a union rep. And when I got into the bargaining division at Indiana University that I was covered by a union, she looked at me and said, "You're joining because in Indiana, it is illegal for a public institution to have a closed shop union. We're not truly right to work, but it's right to work if it's a public union." And I joined, and she talked me into joining the board and sitting on the negotiating table. And I have never learned so many horrifying things on like the actual relationship between people and the institutions that have raised them up, because 10% membership, and let me tell you, the 90% that weren't members, their relationship with the union was fucked up. It was mind-bogglingly horrible, but we didn't used to be like that.
You didn't used to be that, but then the rich people, then the family, I mean, rich people realized that the only real threat to their power is collective action.
Yeah.
Over here, the socialists got in, or not so, some people, no, reserve social democrats, if you will, then sweet people, got in power. So the unions had people in their corner all the way, while the unions never really had anyone in their corner over there. And the rich people were like, "Yeah, unions are a problem for us. We're going to have to do." Yeah, I know that unions in some cases got corrupt over there. I get that, but let's be honest. The real reason is because there's been a lifelong campaign trying to dismantle them now.
Oh yeah.
In so many ways, in the public eye, union busting in general, lots of different ways to do it. But there's certain words you say to Americans, regardless of where they stand politically. You can go to a room full of American communists and just say a few sentences, and everyone's butt will clench. That's my experience.
You're not wrong.
Yes, I mean, union is one of those words. Say positive things about unions. Say that the government should get more power over the private sphere, so private sector.
Yeah.
You can talk to lefty Americans. You can talk to really reasonable, loving left-wing Americans. They fight the power about social issues. They're great. If you say that, they will get worried.
Yeah.
Well, and but that also comes back to, and this has been an ongoing strategy of the right. If they can decay our society's trust in our institutions of power, once that is decayed enough, no tool that is capable of improving the society looks safe to use. And it doesn't matter if the entire population wants to move in the right direction. If they don't feel safe picking up any of the tools on the table to do it, cool. Doesn't even fucking matter. And that's how America works.
That's how America works, man. And that's why I want us to elegantly sort of We really would have been more elegant earlier. Not elegant back to mage, but this has been mage about mage all the time in my head.
Oh yeah.
This is why I want to get to the evolution of M20, because we can look at the other high-minded ideals, street level
experience,
really bad bender with drugs and alcohol and a complete life collapse. And then we're now with the Phoenix. We're rising with the Phoenix here. But the entire concept has changed at this point, because mage used to be technology versus magic. And as you said earlier, and as I said, we were going to bring that up later, the time is now. Magic is technology. That's the point of M20 in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
There isn't a core experience anymore. Because previously, except for Sorcerer's Crusade, because the Order of Reason were here in that edition. Let's be honest. Let's be honest here. Yeah. Come on. In first edition, second edition, third edition, or revised edition, let's call whatever. Traditions were the core experience. They were intended core group, so to speak. In at least the way it was presented and people viewed it. In M20, and I've talked to you about this, even some people disagree, that's not the idea here. Like M20, the technocracy, the spirits, orphans, tradition mages, they're all equally the core experience of mage now.
Yeah.
The real enemy isn't the founding.
Yeah. Well, the real enemy is Nefanti, and the real enemy is in the mirror. Part of that shift took place during 1997-98, when we started working on when we started working on Guide to the Technocracy, Sorcerer's Crusade, and the Technomancer's Toy Box and Tales of Magic Dark Adventures. By that point, I was going, this whole I'm afraid of cyborgs thing is really played out. The whole black hats and mirror shades thing is really kind of silly. Let's start. It's not even so much a matter of humanizing the technocracy, though that was definitely part of it, as the point that I wanted to make, the point that we were going for with me and my design group, was that the problem wasn't technology. The problem wasn't even the technocracy. The problem was the lure of power, and how the lure of power makes you blind to the consequences of your actions. And that's something that goes back on some levels all the way back to the Book of Chantries, where I brought in resonance. But more to the point, I started turning around 1990, 96, 97, started turning the mirror more away from this group is bad into going, you have the potential to be bad. Look at what you're doing. And part of that comes out of my own experiences and my own beliefs. Being pagan, I believe that the things that you do affect the world on a greater level. That metaphysical actions have consequences as well as physical ones. Part of it also is just getting older and realizing that going yay for my side does not necessarily mean your side is right. There was a point I had a realization during a protest that I was at in the early 90s, where a bunch of I think it was the Women's March for Women's Rights, but I'm not sure. But in any case, there was a bunch of asshole counter protesters there, and they were doing the whole, oh God, oh Lord, save us from this thing. And so a number of people on quote unquote my side had surrounded them and had a megaphone and were screaming, pagan and proud, pagan and proud, pagan and proud. And I joined that group and I'm yelling, pagan and proud, pagan and proud. And then I just kind of stepped out. I had one of those moments where you step outside of yourself, and I looked at myself from their eyes, and what I saw was everything that I feared. And I stopped, and I'm like, I got really, really ashamed. I was like, holy shit, I'm being the monster that they're fighting against. I'm not actually this thing, but I'm seeing them as the monster. Holy shit, they're seeing me as the monster, and I'm acting like it. And I stepped back, and I walked away, shaking my head, because I was like, fuck, we're both wrong here. I believe absolutely in the cause of pro-choice, and obviously I'm a feminist. And anybody who said that, fuck you if you don't like it. But the tactics, the things that we were doing, the me standing there and us standing there shouting these people down was only making them more determined in what in doing what they believed was right. And I brought that experience into Mage, and I said that, it doesn't matter if you're verbena, that doesn't necessarily make you a good person. If you're a black suit, and thank you. I think it was Jess. I don't know if it was Jess or Malcolm Shepard who turned it from Men in Black into Black Suit, but that was a change I really liked from the revised era. Whether if you're a black suit, that doesn't necessarily make you wrong. What is wrong is what you do with it. And so one of the big elements, it was already in Mage back in the 90s, but I brought it to the forefront in Mage 20, was it's not yay this group, boo this group. It's what do you do with that power you have?
And that is one of the things I latched onto the most when I read M20. And I keep leaning harder and harder and harder into that. It's funny whenever I see people talk about, and I tend to see Mage and Changeling together in this statement. Oh, Mage and Changeling are the harder to access horror games in the line. And I'm like, I don't know that that's true. I mean, for me,
I contend to this day, Changing the Dreaming is the darkest game in World of Darkness.
Well, that's a whole other rabbit hole you can get down. I mean, some of the things I'm about to say about Mage also apply to Changeling, which is kind of why I mentioned it. But the idea that, like, yes, the core premise of the World of Darkness is you get to play a monster, and ultimately this whole, like, it's about what you do to it, brings Mage back and reminds us all that that was the thesis statement. Like, that's the thesis statement. And it also it does some really interesting things, not just in the timing of, like, M20 came out and we've kind of come around, and maybe this is what Mage that was always there, but that seems to be where pop culture is going.
Yeah.
Like, Legion is kind of like that. Mr. Robot is incredibly like that. The end of the last season was just screaming that in huge neon. And also, children/family media. We've just recently wrapped up the original story for Steven Universe and wrapped up Star versus the Forces of Evil, which are like preteen young adult stories, except they're not. I mean, they're really not. They're about abuse and racism and xenophobia, and none of them have villains. They all have, like, people who play antagonist for a while until you realize, like, oh, that's why they're like that.
Yeah.
And
and Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yes. Yeah, that's also really gets into that place. Like, the end of Avatar, even my mind has gone blank. Kozai's daughter.
Azula,
Azula, like, you ended and she is a dark, twisted creature, but, like, I feel for her. I completely understand how she got there. And that's something that didn't used to happen in pop culture the way it does now. And I feel like, tapping into that with Mage 20, like, it's the right time for that. It hits something broader.
I think M20. I think you're all right. And I want to say something, just a brief thing about pop culture before I will make my point about M20. And that's, I think that pop culture, like, not everything has gotten better. I think, like, in a lot of ways, America's gotten worse. I'm sorry, but it's true. Yeah, America's good, but pop culture has gotten better. Like, okay, the internet, like, fandoms have not gotten better; they have gotten worse. But pop culture has gotten better. Okay, because the pop culture across the entire spectrum, from movies, video games, comics, they've evolved. They become more diverse, and they've also become more grounded in reality. Like the days of, to use a wrestling analogy, nobody will get maybe, the days of the cookie cutter rock and roll express, yay, we're great and nothing dark about us, everything's great, and the swarmy, really nasty, horrible people that have no redeeming qualities. We aren't in that day anymore, because that's never been reality.
Yeah,
that's never been reality. Like, it was a very nice fantasy, but that's not how the world is. The world is grays, and I know people like to talk about grays, and the world is really gray, and we got the really bad 90s era grimdark. We're like, we're living in the grays now. But
Mhm.
now things are in a lot of ways seemingly more brighter, but we're dealing with real grays here.
Mhm.
And that's why I actually like Avatar, for example, because Avatar, the context isn't really between villains. They're fighting a comprehensive belief system that's done really well for
Mhm.
itself in both Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. In all of them, you're dealing with comprehensive belief systems that have done really well for themselves. They have a lot of arguments for why they're around. They're wrong, but you can see why they're there. They're
Mhm.
like the first season of Legend of Korra is all about is about equality. How the notion of social equality can evolve into becoming this ungainly bad thing, even if it's motivated come from the right thing. It's like social classes and everything. It's amazing. You could not have that in the 90s, which is why I hate nostalgia people, because people are like, oh, things are so bad now. Like cartoons used to be so great or whatever. Like, I mean, there's certain things that were better back then, but game design has evolved so much. There's so
Oh
many
God,
great games
yes.
now. The great games have grown
Afterlife.
up.
Yeah.
Afterlife, and that's what I'm also getting to, but
Mhm.
that will be our sweet finale, honestly. But games have grown up. Video games have
Mhm.
grown up. Comic books have grown up. Like Marvel. Just look at Marvel comics. Like the
Yeah.
movies might not so much in some ways, but the comics, like we have Kamala Khan, you have like Miles Morales, you have all these like cool, diverse characters living in the real world. Like I was literally leading a Marvel comic in a series called The Champions, which is basically the Avengers but with teens, and it's about confronting
Mhm.
social issues,
Mhm.
which is awesome. And at one point, a guest character is like, "I want to deal with complex social issues." It's like because like there was it's not about like supervillain. It's not like a secret cult in the police or something. It's about systemic racism. Like I want to
Mhm.
deal with that. That's all I'm doing. Comics, and it left. All right, that's amazing. Because that's how pop culture has gotten better. And I think there's still a long way to go in a lot of ways. But with the growth of independent creators now, due to the
Mhm.
internet and all of the COVID, I think that's a real bright spot. And
Yeah.
to bring it back to me to talk about how really we're really in the grays, but it's a bright, nice gray instead of the really boring, dark Batman voice, grimdark gray.
Are you talking bat? Is that what? I
Is that
can't
what bat
understand what
sounds
it sounds
like?
like. I
Yeah,
love that video. I love that video.
yeah.
So yeah, and one of the things to one of the things that really that has also really informed Mage 20 is that when I was doing back when I was doing Mage in the 90s, it was one I was a lot younger. You know, I started doing it when I was 27, and I had this break of this break from it. I was still living with Mage's legacy, whether I wanted to or not. But one of the things that I got in between, and I really want to thank fans for this. One of the things I got a lot of between around 2003 and 2012, because for a few years I just distanced myself. I changed my name. I didn't talk about White Wolf. I didn't deal with most White Wolf people. I didn't follow the White Wolf books at all. I just did my thing and just said that was something I did a long time ago. But when I started making my peace with White Wolf, which had a lot to do also with Rich Thomas.
Who's
Uh,
awesome by all accounts.
yeah, he and I did not get along very well back in the 90s, but we both grew up in between that time. And he bought me a drink at Gen Con, I believe it was 2005. Yeah, it was 2005. And he's like, you know, I miss working with you. And I'm like, I miss working with you. And we both confessed that we'd been douchebags when we were younger, and we apologized for that. And we started working together again. We'd both grown up in that time. And part of that growing process for me included talking with and meeting with and corresponding on online with Mage fans, people who'd grown up with Mage, like you two, and seeing what a difference what our work had done, what a difference our work on Mage had done with people's lives, and that was huge. And when I was doing it the first time around, it was just a matter of get the book out, get the book out, get the book out, get the book out. The very little interaction that I had with people was usually people arguing with me about rules. And when I was doing it that first time around, I used to have a lot of nightmares of like being called to account for what I had inspired people to think. when in the later part of the 2000s, I started actually talking to people and interacting with people who, including my stepdaughters, who had grown up on Mage, not knowing me, not having any connection with me, and showing me and telling me what their lives were like because of our work in the 90s. And I was like, wow, in the 90s, I feared what are you inspiring people to be? What I've seen in the 20 years since then is our work has inspired people to look at life more broadly, to do more, I think, to do more good in the world. And so when I came back to Mage in 2012, I was like, that's a huge responsibility. We have a huge responsibility. And I know that some critics of the Mage 20 line have said that it has gotten preachy. That's I think that's valid in places. But the reason that it has gotten preachier, I think, is one reason is because I've realized how important the things that we're saying in Mage can be to people. And I feel it's really important to keep that legacy in mind and that influence in mind. And partly because some people didn't fucking get it the first time.
Yeah.
Um,
And
That
like
is the truth.
and that is
there,
true. And I want an acknowledgement from you. I want something on the air. You heard it here, folks. If anyone who's sort of right wing has managed to last through all of this, I don't know how, but can you acknowledge this on the air for me? Was White Wolf back in its glory days, quote unquote? Was it inspired, influenced by? Did the fact that many of the company were leftists, did that influence the content at all?
well, of course.
So what you're saying here, is that White Wolf has not been taken over by the evil feminists, and it's been
No.
feminists all along.
So this is one of those things that a lot of people all over the spectrum don't seem to have realized, that the socio-political spectrum don't seem to have realized. White Wolf had, even back in the day, White Wolf had the most diverse staff and the most diverse freelance pool of any role-playing game company in the business.
They use the word she as the default pronoun in books.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I'm not just talking about the approach in the books. I'm talking
Yeah,
about
but
we had female line developers. Um, we had Native American authors and artists. We had Black authors and artists. We had Muslim author. I had got into a debate with somebody about this one offline at one point when they had referred to the Ali Batin as being anti-Muslim, like the Ali Batin were created by a Muslim.
yeah,
Salman Abbott is a Sufi Muslim. They weren't created as a slam on Islam. They were created by a Muslim. He was an American Muslim, yes, but he's Muslim.
yes.
Uh,
The Alibatin is one of the most lovingly made groups in Mage, I think.
yeah,
But
but we did not the idea that the White Wolf people back in the day was a bunch of white guys. That was never true.
I
Uh,
mean,
we were mostly white. Guys, 50-50, really, in terms of the overall staff. There were definitely cultural blind spots. There were definitely gender blind spots, and we realized just how sexist things could be, even though we thought we knew better when Jen Hartshorn was head of was head of Vampire and Wraith. There was a lot of uncomfortable realization in White Wolf about a lot of sexist assumptions we still had, and a lot of sexist behaviors we still indulged in without even realizing how bad they were. But the idea that we were just a bunch of white dudes, upholding the whiteocracy is not true. And it's
yes,
not just not true because we were better than that. It's just we weren't just a bunch of white guys.
no,
About a third of the staff was queer. Um, we had a number of people of color working both in the on staff and as freelancers. We didn't have enough because there weren't that many people of color involved in the role playing game industry at all in the
yeah.
1980s, and
For,
social media didn't exist. You couldn't contact somebody in Japan and say, is this culturally or linguistically correct, because you didn't have Facebook didn't exist. Google barely existed. Mindspring, not Mindspring, or their MySpace appeared.
Minesweeper barely existed.
Yeah, I mean, MySpace, I believe, went online 3 years after I left White Wolf.
Yeah,
Facebook, a
That puts
decade
things
later.
in perspective.
Yeah,
that's good.
does it though? Fuck, I'm old.
Well,
But
I mean, let's put it. I was going to make this comment earlier, but I didn't want to because I didn't want both of you to feel old. But when you talked about like the decline in 1996, I was like,
uh
the year I was born sucked.
yeah.
We're going.
Oh, that was no. You want
Oh,
no, no, you want a reality check. When because Jacqueline Brick and I had collaborated on the Book of the Fallen, and I want to say just how impressed I am with Jacqueline, because I was absolutely dead set against collaborating with anybody on writing that book until I'd seen some of the work Jacqueline had done for Cult. At which point I'm like, no, you're in. I think you can do this. And she proved me correct on that. She proved herself correct on that one. And her work on Book of the Fallen was very, very good, and I'm glad to have had her involved. Jacqueline was born the year that I wrote my first book for White Wolf. Like, I'm collaborating with somebody who was born the year I started doing this shit. Oh fuck, I'm old.
Oh fuck!
And actually, Jacqueline was one of the people who got me to realize that some of the people, to go back to what I said a few minutes ago, some Mage fans just didn't fucking get it the first time. Apparently, when Jax was working in Silicon Valley, there were a bunch of programmers out there, douchebag programmers, who, like, according to Jax, had like their first edition Mage copies in shrink wrap or something like that, but they were Mage fans. But they were Mage fans who thought that Mage meant that they had the right to do whatever they wanted if they had the power to do whatever they wanted.
No, no,
And I was like,
no.
wow, talk about
well,
fucking missing the point.
well, and to be honest, I had a conversation early on with it was several years ago, with someone who viewed Mage as and I think this was largely from interacting with the community, but some of the text, and they did not think this was a good thing, but they read it as a libertarian statement about might is right, as meritocracy. Well, specifically about, well, isn't Mage ultimately a big exploration of the libertarian idea of meritocracy? And I was like, no. I mean, if the mages were presented as good guys, maybe you could read it that way.
The thing is, and this is actually leading very into what I wanted to say, that the thing I taught more, there's a quote I want to use for it, but I've been thinking when I rereading M20 and rereading Mage, and that's the traditions and the technocracy too, but the traditions and technocracy, they're very human groups, okay? They're cool, they're powerful, they're knowledgeable, and they're wrong. Like M20 in a lot of ways, and I think this actually applies more to technocracy and tradition, but the M20 is mostly about their failure. I find. I think it's about the tradition's failure, but all of the traditions have been that to an extent. But M20, I think, is the real one that seriously examines the failures of the technocracy in a realistic manner, because the Revise is very like, the technocracy are corrupted by the family from within, and I don't think that's a real examination of their failure to an extent. But I think like that, because the technocracy has been consistently, I think, the biggest force of good in the world, but they've also failed. They started out with the best of intentions. They cared, and they still care, and they failed. They're wrong. And I think that's where it leads into Book of the Fallen. I think that Book of the Fallen proves that Book of the Fallen proves that the Nefandi haven't won, but this is the age of where both the traditions and the technocracy have equally failed. And while the traditions are all about the meritocracy thing, and the technocracy are more about like them uplifting everyone else, whereas the traditions are elitist and like, only those who earn it can be ready. Let's be honest.
I would say the technocracy. Yeah, the technocracy still has a fair bit of meritocracy in it.
Within maybe, but their goal isn't to make everyone mages as much as it's to make you don't have to be. Like they're paving the way for humanity, so to speak.
As long as they're in control.
As long as they're in control. I mean, they aren't the other reason. I'm not saying they're perfect, but I'm saying that whereas the traditions are like, oh yeah, we're going to bring humanity's freedom back, and everyone but you have to be cool enough to be a magus. You can't everyone can't be a mage. But one day maybe everyone can merit being a mage and awaken together in ascension. Yes, and I think, and that's why I say the real heroes of M20. If there's ever going to be such, because all groups are flawed and all groups have the potential of being corrupted and be the villain. I think the Disparate Alliance is the closest we're getting at this point. Or orphans.
Yeah.
I love an orphan.
Orphans are the best. But I think that's the, and I think that's beautiful. I think it's very beautiful because we're talking about these titans of magic or science, so to speak. These great institutions and how they've both been like trying to be like the shepherds of reality, and they've both failed. And,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's what I feel the most when I read it. I read M20 is that yes, these and people. That's why people misunderstand it. Like the traditions are very cool, right? The Sons of Ether are awesome. They're great battle rays and dinosaur ships, and the VAs are. In some circles, I'm sure people think they're cool, but they suck. And Dream Speakers are awesome, and Verbena are really stylish, and the Order of Hermes, they for their mustaches and people, but they throw fireballs and the K-Shicks. I mean, Vusha, they're awesome, and so on. And the Pharaohs, they're dark and mysterious, and so they're really cool, but they're wrong. And I think M20 is the best one to illustrate just that. Am I correct here, Phil? Am I onto something?
Yeah, well, it's and the fact that now I'm an old middle-aged dude instead of being a young angry dude. I have more perspective that I have put into Mage 20, but I actually addressed that in as many words in the essay Magic and the Fascist Urge in the Book of Secrets, that the core premise of Ascension is itself fascist.
Yeah.
I have always, this is even in the older Mage books, but I've always had kind of a side eye at the concept of, when everybody believes like I do, the world will be perfect. I've always critiqued that in Mage, but I'm especially critiquing it in Mage 20, and flat out say in the Book of Secrets, this ideal is itself horrible in implementation, and also on a historical level, it's not merely the Ascension War of which this is true. When you research magical real magical societies, the secret societies, particularly in Europe, particularly from the 1600s onward, they are utopian in the sense of, well, I will have ultimate power, and then I will bring ultimate power to the world, and the world will live under my ultimate power vision, because that's ultimately the way everything's going to work. And that's fucked.
Yeah.
But they didn't have the perspective to see that the idea of forcing everybody to believe as you believe is intrinsically screwed up. I mean, even as far back, or even as recent, I should say, as Blavatsky, and I'm addressing this a bit in Victorian Mage, though not nearly as much as I would like. The idea of Blavatsky's idea of the coming race and the hidden masters, that there was this little group of people who were guiding the rest of the world in some enlightened design. I'm like, that's actually really horrifying.
It is.
That's a horrible thought. That's not a good thought. It's awful.
And one thing that I've become more and more aware of, talking about the whole history of Mage, that first edition happened kind of in this crux of, ooh, conspiracy theories are cool. And, that X-Files, I mean, and from a purely narrative, no cultural context standpoint, conspiracy theories are cool. Hollow Earth, Hitler riding a Tyrannosaurus Rex, Dark Side of the Moon Nazi base. This is hilariously awesome and pulpy and campy and fun. And then you actually have to stare down that there are people that believe it and why they believe those things. And it becomes a lot less cool very quickly.
I go into that a lot in the book of the Fallen.
Yeah.
The idea of, you thought this was a neat idea. Guess what?
Yeah, not at all. But like it is really interesting because that's where in all the World of Darkness in the beginning had this like really deep run of eschatological millennialism, end of the world thought. And you hit Mage, and it's really interesting because so many of the things that are sort of aesthetically tapped in Mage are millennialism, but like that weird cyclical failing eschatology that like I want the end because it'll prove me right, and it never comes because, honey, you're not right. And I feel like there's a thing to tap into there. Like I feel like a lot the community has moved away from the whole end times angle because it's like, oh, we brought the end time, it's over. We want to keep playing and developing, and I'm like,
I wish someone said that during the process of making V5, but okay.
well, I mean,
they still kept it. Originally, they were going to be done with it. When all the Spaffadons, they were like, yeah, we're moving away from it. Gehenna's over. Yay.
Well,
No.
but Gehenna.
Yeah,
but it wasn't the end times. Like it became something else.
They were going to be like, oh yeah, but they were wrong. Gehenna wasn't the end times. We're done with it now. Let's move on with our lives and do something new. But they didn't do that. No. Okay. Anyway, that's ranting aside. Sorry.
I mean, to be honest, especially once you start doing historic pieces with the World of Darkness, I really like the idea that the reason all these supernatural creatures are obsessed with the end times are the same reason humans are obsessed with the end times. Like the same reason that, Crowley couldn't stop ranting about the new Eon and all the millennialism in the Nazi Party and, 2012, and it's always there because it's a way to give up responsibility. The end times are coming, so I don't have to take responsibility because none of this matters. And then the end doesn't come and you die and you're like, oh God, wait, did all that matter? Can I get a do-over? I think actually tapping into that is really fascinating in the World of Darkness. And Mage is like the best place to do it.
Mage is the best place to do it because responsibility is one of the core ideas, one of the core themes. And I think and that's where there's another meme I like to use to explain how mages can go wrong. But at the same time, I'm so with this guy. There's a Spider-Man meme that goes around where basically it's like, hey, you can rewrite people's DNA so completely you can turn them into dinosaur. You could use that to cure cancer. And you see like this bipedal dinosaur is like, but I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn people into dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. That is a great example of how, especially Sons of Aether in that specific example, but how mages can go wrong. But at the same time, I'm totally with that guy. If I could rewrite DNA, I wish I could think I'd be like, I would cure cancer with it. I would be turning people into dinosaurs. I would be making so many weird shit. I would make new sapient races only because I think it's boring to only have one, and so because I'm not a responsible person. I'm not a responsible grown-up person. I'm a wandering parasite child, and if I could turn people into dinosaurs, there would be so many dinosaurs for me right now. And I mean, I've used the example of how I think Frankenstein was a hack because he made a person using person parts instead of a moose, and I stand by that. But anyway, that's an anecdote for the day. I think I love what M20 has become. That's why I wanted to do this topic today. Because I think Mage is the only game that's really evolved. I think Werewolf is stuck. I think Vampire is stuck in certain ways. I think, of course, mechanically has changed, introduced some new neat ideas here, Mockery breeds there, change up a few. But I think Mage is the only one that consistently changes and consistently evolves. And in the future, who knows what we get from the future? I mean, I only know about one part of the future. I know about the Book of the Fallen future. I have no idea what technology Load has to come with. Because, I don't know why. I'm staring really dramatically right now for effect. but there's certainly going to be great things there too. I wouldn't know, but I presume it is. I am very good at being fake, remarkably petty. but I think that, and I hope that the rest of the world artists can follow suit. I don't believe it will, but Mage does that. I think it's really cool examining that. So, do any of you have any more to say about M20 and its greatness?
Well, there's still a lot of things I can't say. I will say that when the Book of the Fallen was definitely the most relevant, and it was very, very hard to write as a result.
I thought at some point you were going to have complete meltdown when writing that.
That was a rough period, and we've already gone over the whole dead people thing. But more to the point, as we've talked about, I write like an actor, which means that I read and research and I try to find the emotional reality behind the people, behind whatever it is I'm writing, and getting into the headspace, particularly of Book of the Fallen Chapter 1, getting into the headspace required to write that book was awful. Partly because of all the things that I needed to read and watch in order to get into that headspace, and partly because certain elements of that headspace make sense to me in a shadow sense. I talk about the shadow in Jung's concept of the shadow in the Book of the Fallen, but definitely parts of that, especially in Chapter 1, made sense to me. But they made made the sort of sense that you don't want it to make, if that makes sense. let me
Yes.
untangle that. Yeah, let me untangle that.
I
could
used to
relate
like
to it in ways I don't like.
I used to like the concept of a meritocracy.
Hmm. And then
I
you see
mean,
what it actually looks like.
yeah, well, I mean, meritocracy is a flawed concept because merit is such a loose thing.
Right.
I'm a proponent of technocracy, however, but it's not the technocracy, but the concept of a technocracy. But that's different. But then again, my ideal view of of society is a very weird sort of like collectivist kind of idea of focusing on society as an organism and its
Hmm.
different parts instead of
Yeah.
individual. I don't care. Like as I said, I don't care about individuals. The reason why I think it's important to protect the LGBTQ people and minority groups and so, and it's not because of individual tragedies, but because of it's an impractical thing because they're all a part of society and they're all groups. So the best way to ensure society functions is to have all groups be happy and function well.
Yeah.
So
I
that's why.
absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So I have a very weird I mean I am a friend of the show, one of our favorite guests. We won't really have two, but one of our favorite guests, Rachel, is she's an anarchist,
Hmm.
and as I've talked about the lefty mage thing, people like the left aren't really a unified group because I'm a lefty and
No.
she's a lefty, but we have very different concepts about beyond the fact that we want Black people and gay people and want to get their fair share and be treated properly. We have very different ideas about how society should be run. I want the sort of like Plato, the Republic style system. What? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Not exactly like that, but I want to make all. I want to eliminate the family as a concept, break up family units and have children raised communally. I'm weird, okay?
I think we're probably moving towards that. I think it's going to take us several generations to get there, but family, quote unquote, as we think of it now, really grew out of inheritance rights.
Yeah.
And at a point when like inheritance and money and wealth meant a very specific thing, that it still means to like a tiny portion of society. But as we move away, like we're seeing more and more and more non-monogamous relationship structures being normalized. That throws our whole idea about like, well, whose kids are you? Like that throws it to the wind, and we have to start reshaping things. I think we'll probably come down with a new family, like there will be a new thing. But what we know now, I do think we're going to move to something that's maybe not communal like what people think of as communal now, but more communal than what we're used to.
Yeah, because
And also so much of the so much of the concept of the modern nuclear family is also a product of the industrial era and of turning people into commodities so that you could control the workers by control, but you could add efficiency to the means of production by controlling the families and circumstances of the workers. And I know
Human
that
capital?
probably Marx was not Marx was flawed in a number of regards, but he was not wrong there.
No, he wasn't.
Uh,
And he was.
yeah.
I mean, Marx. Here's the thing. I'm not a Marxist. I am in the Norwegian political party that's closest to Marxist, but I'm not a Marxist personally, or a communist, or whatever. But Marx had a lot of. Marx was right about a lot of things, and he also had some really. He has some really snappy quotes. Let's be honest. Like, we won't make excuses for the terrorists. Is a badass but very
Hmm.
chilling quote, which also can be
Mhm.
applied to M20, where.
Mhm.
Which is actually kind of how I've imagined if the traditions win. Like, the young traditions member idealists would like, things will be better now, and then
Hmm.
suddenly we're talking like mob rule and horrible retribution shit. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But yeah, by the way, I will also say I find it very funny that you said "oh sorry" when I was also going to say "oh sorry" for interrupting.
That's because we're trying to be polite here.
We're yeah, but we are, but at the same time, I'm not, because I'm autistic, so I don't play by the game rules. I just
I'm apparently on the
like
spectrum too, which makes a lot of sense about certain elements of Mage.
high five,
Uh, yeah,
Spectrum
but
5.
yeah, I don't know. Coyote was fairly emphatic that she felt I was, and I think I think in a lot of regards she was probably right. It's hard to tell at my age because especially with my acting background and my PR background and so forth.
Chameleon.
Yeah, I watching people and analyzing the way people interact is something that has been part of my career for roughly 30 years, over 30 years at this point. So it's really hard to tell what is learned behavior and or rather what is innate perception and what is learned skill. I'm not really sure at this
Yeah.
point. But I look back at my childhood and I go, wow, that if the autistic spectrum diagnosis had existed in the 60s and 70s, I'd have totally been put on the spectrum at that point. At
Well,
that point, they just called it minimal brain dysfunction. But sorry, go ahead.
If you'd lived in the medieval period, you would have been called a changeling.
Yeah. Oh, not even just the medieval period. I address this a little bit in Victorian Mage, but
Yeah,
that was still
and a prominent concept then too. True.
Bridget Cleary was killed in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I believe it was 1887, but I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head. But Bridget Cleary was killed by her husband and several people from the town for being a changeling, and that was within living memory. Really a long living memory, but still.
Yeah, but still, that's within the living memory, which is also why I also always really disliked it. I read an academic paper disproving the entire notion of magic is dead, because it was like, yeah, and because
sorry.
Because a lot of the older Mage books were like, after the Renaissance, technocracy won, nobody believed in magic anymore. I mean, it was legally after the Renaissance, it was legally mandated for centuries that you had to believe in magic's existence.
Yeah, that's something else that has changed in the intervening time, and I've been outright critical of in the more recent books. Back when we were a bunch of American suburban kids, we thought that nobody believes in magic anymore except us weird ass pagans. But one of the things that getting older, traveling more, reading more, experiencing more, is I realized that premise was innately flawed and innately false. It just was never true. It's not.
I mean, there are
true.
several states in the South where sorcery is illegal.
Well, yeah, I was one of the other inspirations behind the sort of the embattled traditions thing is I was a pagan in the fucking South.
I mean, okay, I feel I have to say this. I know a lot of people from the South. The South is an amazingly entertaining place to hear about, but the South has only made like a few good, like you and like Ric Flair and a few other. Beyond that, the South is horrible. Sorry.
I'm gonna defend like that the South has produced a number of amazing people because anytime you have some place as culturally rich as that also has so much oppressive, fucked up, terrible in it, the
Yeah.
people that get out of that and experience both the richness and are on the wrong end of that underside, like
Oh, awesome.
that forges something really uniquely powerful and wonderful. There's a lot of great that's come out of the South.
Oh yeah, I know.
But it's come through a ringer.
It's come through. I was making a joke, but yeah, like there's not the worst and best thing about the South at the same time are the people. Let's put it that way. There's some amazing people there, and as a North, I love a lot of the straight up, the straight shooting kind of like, no bullshit kind of ways of the South. Like I watched an amazing video of a seemingly of a redneck talking about how he had went to his first all black cookout as the only white person there, and you're thinking, oh god, this guy's racist. No, and it turned out no, this is the best thing I've ever been to. Awesome people, best fucking food, and I'm like, I love the South.
The South has the South does definitely have the best food in America. That's no question there.
That doesn't say much. Sorry. I've been to the West Coast. I've seen what passes for food there. That's not Mexican food. And it's evil. But anyway, but I want we've talked about Mage, and Mage has been like, we're now dealing with the Soaring Phoenix, and who knows what happens after that, after the Phoenix goes through another transformation and becomes the fifth head or whatever.
Yeah, I have no idea. Yeah, honestly, I have no idea where things going at this point, because I mean, I'm finishing up the last of the Mage 20 Kickstarter books, and where Mage goes from here is going to depend on the rights holders.
Yes.
What, you're not doing Digital Web 3.0 next?
No.
I don't know.
Sorry,
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we might be with Onyx Path. We might be doing Mage for the next 10 years. We might be told we can't do it at all. I don't know. Yeah. None of us have an answer to that.
Nobody knows. I've been trying. Here's the thing, Rachel. You make that joke, but I've been trying to sneak my way into Digital Web 3.0 for months now.
I want that book so bad, but I also acknowledge that, like, I also, I could be a little girl who wants a pony. Doesn't mean I'm getting one, and there are reasons.
Yes, but the reason why I think Digital Web, even regardless of what happens to Mage, Digital Web is the most important book, because I think the Digital Web is, if you're going to keep Mage relevant, and with our society, the Digital Web is the most important realm. In Mage, it's more important than the Astral Emperor or whatever.
That's part of what I was working, because I started working on the book, and then I got told to stand down on it and finish the Kickstarter books on it. But one of the early lines, the first line of the introduction, at least as I was writing it, was, welcome to reality 2.0. Now we're all on the digital web. Don't read the comments. Really don't.
Yeah, I mean. The thing about that book, though, is like the only way to make that book not immediately obsolete is to write it in such a conceptual, abstracted way. Like, there's a way to write about what has been consistent about the World Wide Web since it went live. There is a way to do that, but it's so academic and it's so abstract that I feel like it would be an amazing, fascinating book and a terrible game text.
Yeah,
like
I started doing research for it when I was working on it. I started doing research for it, and when I'm talking about research, I'm talking books that were 2 or 3 years old, and even they were hopelessly outdated at that point.
Yeah,
if we had written the book back when we had originally intended to write it in 2000, this is 2019, so I guess that would be about 2015, 2016. It would be outdated just by the Trump presidency and all the weird alternative reality shit that's come about through that. I address a lot of that in Book of the Fallen in ways that I think a lot of people are just going to go, holy fuck, that's not funny.
Yeah.
I had this conversation with someone the other day who was like, I hope you don't bring anything political in. Like, he's not he's like I don't want normal politics in Mage. I'm like, what? It's Mage.
I don't.
It's not even about Mage. Magic, and you all have probably seen me have this discussion with people online. Magic is innately political.
Yes.
It's not even Mage. Magic is innately political.
Magic is an innately political concept. You know, like I studied one semester, mind you. I'm not an expert, but I studied one just at university level about how how political the history of magic is. It's one of the most political concepts that we have.
And let's be honest, not political means treating the status quo as an absolute truth, which is political. Like, it just
if you want
and subverting
if you want pure escapism, D&D is there for you. You can get loot or whatever. Sorry for disparaging D&D.
D&D 5 has certain elements of certain socio-political elements in it, which I like. That's one of the reasons I like D&D 5. It's not just a bunch of white guys going around killing shit and taking their treasure.
That's speaking of that. There's an amazing book series I wanted to read one day. It's called the Dark Prophet Saga, and it's about the 2008 financial collapse or crisis. But the lens is adventuring. Okay, it's D&D, but with the 2008 financial crisis. So instead of the stock market, the financial market is adventuring, the adventuring industry. So when people do quests like, oh, the dragon, you have to slay the dragon of Windspar or whatever, the quest giver owns 9/10 of the loot, and then he sells off shares of the quest to investors who make up like what they call funds, which are basically just shell companies that to bet on that, and then they share, and then they can then sell the interest further along and so on. So the entire adventuring industry is the stock market, and and it goes into like about how that collapses and how you can't really have sustainable eternal growth in an industry that's based entirely around getting loot, which is shit that's already been stolen from someone. So that's that's an amazing thing, and it goes and I think you will love that. And so I mean, and in the second book, compartmentalized threat obligations become the new big financial trend, instead of debt obligations, whatever. And so on. It's an amazing thing. But anyway, I think that the social commentary isn't very important, and I think there's this idea of pure escapism, which doesn't really exist. It doesn't exist, and I think it's not something to strive for. And the same person, there's a superhero show called Black Lightning, and it was like,
I love that show. Love that show.
That show is amazing. I've not seen season 2 yet, but he was like, I liked it. But it became so much about them being black people. Why can't it just be a superhero show? And I'm like,
what? Because they are black people.
Yeah.
Well, no, but at the same time, like, we have to be totally not historically accurate about like people living in other contexts. But if there's a black character, no, they need to look just like me. We can't be accurate to that experience. Like, do people hear themselves talk?
Yes, but this person was like, why can't it just be a superhero? Because there are tons of that already. But the best superhero shows right now, in my opinion, Black Lightning, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, and Supergirl. Awesome social commentary in all of them. Because
I'm gonna throw in Doom Patrol. I gotta say,
I've not seen it yet. But
sweet Danny the Street.
That is, I'm going to see Doom Patrol because the Danny the Street thing you wrote to me. Because I think you put it out and you also messaged me about it. I had to see that. And I'm like, it sounds perfect.
It's so good.
But like in
Runaways is very good.
Yeah. Again, pop culture has gotten much better. Superhero comics used to be the worst about these things. But now it's awesome because adaptations are better than comics.
In many cases they are. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, Punisher, Jessica Jones, and Alias was a good comic. The Jessica Jones, the TV series, is light years better.
The Jessica Jones season 1 is probably the best one season of any superhero show that's ever been. It's the best.
It so much.
It's actually like, and here's the thing: I didn't appreciate how great it was on the first viewing. I had to see it the second time. And when I saw it, and I'd grown since then too, but I saw it the second time. This is the best analogy for an abusive relationship I've ever seen. This is brilliant. this is so gaslighting, and this is so amazing. And the reason why, like, after I saw the second time, because people, like, I saw interviews with David Tennant's, like, your character is so charming in the show. I'm like, what the fuck? What show are you watching?
But that's how people in abuse, we cover this in Book of the Fallen too. That's how abusive people sell. That's how abusive people get into and stay in relationships where they're abusing people. They're not standing up there, going yah ha ha. And that's one of the big changes that the Nefandi have gone through over the years, is instead of the worm mages going mwah ha ha, I shall summon the evil by sacrificing this puppy. It's more about okay, those are those people that you're getting aimed at. They're not the ones who are actually doing who are actually running the show, because the ones who are actually running the show are your best friend. They're the person you believe, because the things they say resonate with what you think, with what you want to believe.
Brock Turner was such a great athlete. He
God, yeah, exactly that sort of thing.
Yeah, he's in the family got caught, but yeah. That's the concept, and that's why I also wanted to say about Book of, because I think Book of the Fallen is going to be a haymaker in so many people's faces. Victor saw me once be in a discussion with the guy who was like, the Nefandi should really be playable, because it should be like the weed out the week. And I'm like, they were never intended to be playable.
No.
And this is big, but the thing, Revised is guilty of that, because Revised made him into sexy evil, and that's the worst thing you can do if you want to do. Like, there's a difference between, they appear as sexy evil but they're horrible, and making things sexy evil, because they're bad people who want to destroy the universe.
Yeah, I ended up, and I think we've talked about this on previous episode, but I ended up cutting the prelude that I had written for which I think were both in the Brain Trust.
Yeah.
Yes, I only been in one.
I read the prelude, and I was one of the people that was like, "Oh, this is so spot on tone," and I don't think I can ever read it again.
and that was the entire idea. Well, part
yeah.
My empathy is so limited that I managed to read the entire Book of the Fallen and not feel a thing, like, emotionally. But that's because my like, as I said, I interface with the world academically and through fiction. So that's why I didn't feel anything, but I was like, this is so horrifying. But I recognized that logically. I didn't feel anything. But that's not like, I'm badass and I don't feel. But it's just like, I managed to read it and not be like, I read the prelude and I read it again. But that's not a positive thing. That's a bad thing. But
I felt literally nauseous, not only writing that prelude, but reading back over it while I was working on the revisions. And the nausea was intentional. I mean, the level of violence, because it was completely addressing the whole Nefandi should be playable. And my idea behind writing it was, if you think you want to play this after reading this, go see a psychiatrist, dude. If you think that the Nefandi are good are good in Nito after reading this. And I understand. I had also, as I think we talked about, I also kind of wrote it as the thing to take away from everything else, so that when the publishers saw it and went, oh my God, no, we can't publish that, I could say, okay, we're going to cut that, and everything looks innocuous by comparison. And part of it was also that I wanted to de-glamorize evil and show that evil is not, mwahaha, I shall now strap you into the torture chamber while I explain my evil plan, but that it is the person who would perfectly calmly explain to their child why they're selling them off to a pedophile, and why that's going to be good for them in the long run, because then they'll learn how to exploit other people's weaknesses while purging their own. That's a horrifying idea. And I wanted it to be horrifying, and I also, by flipping the gender of the person who was being abused, wanted to take out the element of titillation that is so often used in sexual assault, sexual violation things, and saying, no, this is not, the cringing girl being nyahahad, because some of you all are going to get off on that. This is So if you're a little boy and your mother's doing this to you, that's suddenly
Yeah.
unsexy for everybody. And
Yeah.
I wanted it to be uncomfortable. I wanted it to be horrifying. And
Well, and the
Oh, I
thing,
love you.
and it was.
yeah. Well, and the thing that really hit me recently, because this is very recently, is there was, another round of Me Too revelations. And like this particular time, and I don't know if maybe this happened before and it didn't get press, or just there's something about how much is shaking loose. The number of men that I have seen post publicly that like, oh no, but women never enjoy sex. And I'm like,
Yeah. No.
wait, so you're basically admitting that every time you had sex, you honestly thought you were committing rape. Like that's what you're saying. You get that, right? But the thing is like the realization that that's so normal, and then you're like, oh wait, but like how many people have I known who feel that way? And who are that? And like that changes you. Doing that over and over and over and thinking that's okay, that's going to change a person. And like when I think back on that prelude, and I read it, before this most recent round of that conversation, but it puts it in a much, much worse light, but
Yep.
like not scare, like shock tactic worse, but like, oh no, this is the world we live in. This is what we have to clean up.
Yeah. Well, and the prelude was written before Me Too also, which I felt kind of, wow, that was oddly prescient. Ew.
Yeah.
But the idea, the concept of it came out of, and you all have read the author's forward, and Rich at Onyx Path said that he thought that the prelude took away some of the impact of the forward. He said, I thought that the forward was more disturbing than the prelude. And reading back over it, after I cut the prelude out, I agree with him. I think it's actually more of a kick in the jaw to read about some of the things that I personally have witnessed and personally have experienced than it is to have this fictional character in this fictional situation. And I agree with Rich on that one. I think it is stronger without the prelude.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Like I hadn't thought about specifically their relationship to each other, but yeah, I can definitely see that.
I think that Book of Fallen is amazing, and I think that I can actually agree. A prelude being removed kind of it doesn't numb you immediately, like it kind of does. I would imagine, because it's the prelude is such a you have to put it on the storyteller's vault is what I'm really wanted to say, but kind of.
I toyed with, because I am working on a book for the Storyteller's Vault that is of material that I cut out of the Book of the Fallen, because the Book of the Fallen could be twice the length that it is, but that was something that neither the publisher did not want a book that long, and I was not emotionally or physically capable of writing that book any longer than I already did.
Are you going to include the stuff I suggested, but you had to cut Winter-Chan and stuff?
Yeah, that all went out.
Yeah, I know that went out, because it went out even in the portion that I read.
Yeah.
Because I remember I was like kind of like the last Brain Trust member. You just pushed me in to be nice. And
yeah,
I mean, you could do that again. I wouldn't complain. But there's so many things that got cut, that's getting cut from that book, that should be that were cut and will.
I want to clarify for anybody in the audience: the publishers did not make me cut a thing.
No.
The things that were excised, other than the prelude, which Rich didn't say you have to take this. Rich had suggested it, and I agreed with him. But the only things that were cut from the Book of the Fallen were things that I started writing, said, this isn't going to fit. And I took it out. I took out whole sections in there, because those sections were, I was kind of mentally projecting, oh shit, this is going to be like 20, 30,000 words long, and this is going to be like 10,000 words long, and the book is already 30,000 words out. I need to take those sections out because they're not going to fit. The book is already over schedule, over budget, and over long. I can just make another book of this. Nobody made me cut anything from the Book of the Fallen, and I want to thank both of the publishers for that.
I mean, I did feel a little sad, but I understood why, and I think it's better off for it. And I think and Book of Fall is going to be a haymaker to all the Nefandi fans' faces, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, certain people. Oh, go ahead.
I played my first mage games were all done by a guy who did Nefandi Sexy Evil. That's the worst.
No. Although I'm going to jump in on a totally different thing. We're at about 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
I'm going to need to go soon.
We're going to go soon, and therefore we're going to go to the last finale. The bit. Let's see how. Look at how professional.
Democracy Reloaded.
Yes. No, because I don't know anything, so I can't comment on it. I'm just saying you could change that, but more importantly, Afterlife. The newest game,
yes.
the newest game by Angry Hamster Publishing. Shout out to Liz, who's an awesome person. Elizabeth, I can't pronounce her name, so I
can't either. Yeah,
I don't want to ruin it. But Elizabeth, she's an amazing Dutch person. I call her Godmom Liz because we tested part-time gods together, which is another amazing games. But Afterlife, Phil, you're writing for it. Tell the world about Afterlife today.
Okay, well, my involvement with Afterlife is only a few days old. My involvement from a writing standpoint. Elizabeth and I had chatted back when she first went live with the Kickstarter because she had wanted to post about the campaign on the Creative Indie RPGs community, which I put up on Facebook a few years ago. And she's like, "Can I promote this?" And I was like, "Yes, that's what the community is there for." I personally absolutely love the current wave of indie gaming, and I wanted a place. I wanted like a sort of a one-stop shopping because I saw so many campaigns being launched here and there, and people not hearing about them. So I had put together this community so that people could go, "I'm going to go to this community. Here's this campaign for this game. Here, support it." So when Elizabeth had contacted me about it, I said, "Yes, I absolutely want you to do that. That's what the community is for." I looked at the Kickstarters like, "Oh my God, I love this game." And I immediately, backed it because I said, "I love this game. I love what you're doing. I love the concept." And I would love to be a part of it at some point. But you got me. And so last Wednesday or Thursday, actually, I think it may have been Wednesday, but in any case, it was Wednesday or Thursday where Elizabeth was like, "We need another stretch goal. Would you be interested?" I'm like, "Yes." So that's how I became part of the crew. But I was already absolutely behind this game. The concept, on a lot of levels, there are elements of it that are what Jennifer Hartshorn, Sam Chupp, and I had wanted for Wraith. But it is way beyond that in the sense that it's very much a game of the 21st century, and the kind of the exploration of who are you, who were you, and who might you become if you were basically a blank slate in after this material life ended. What might you create? What might you become? What might you remember about the person that you were or are? And I find that there are a lot of fascinating ideas about that. It also ties in with my endlessly in progress novel Holy Creatures to and Fro, so I immediately gravitated toward it on that level too. But I think that I've been reading over it since Elizabeth sent me a PDF on Friday, and I've been reading over it, just going, "Fuck yeah!" This is one of those games, I think, like Bluebeard's Bride or Monster Hearts, that people will be talking about years later, going, "Yeah, there was role playing before this, and then there was role playing after this," or Vampire, for that matter. One of those landmark games. I think this is. I still need to read like that.
I still need to read.
That is really awesome.
Yes, if you love Wraith, if you love otherworldly adventures and introspection and memory stuff and cool stuff written by one of the most progressive casts you can see this side of Onyx Path,
Oh, more so.
Yeah, more so. Yeah, I would say more so. I want it to be nice, but yeah, more so. Check out Afterlife. It's done by Angry Hamster Publishing, which have also done a lot of cool games like Witch, Fated Souls, Familiars of Terra, those sort of things. They have a Patreon, and another brilliant author named Steffi. She does Legend, Lore of Running Spath, and so on. Lots of cool stuff, Flail. And I think we can end things here on a professional note, like we have like this has ever been professional. But and I will thank Victor as always for being a good sport being a guest. You're really a third man in the duo. You've become that. Originally, we were just going to be the Sorcerer's Crusade guest, but then we were like, yeah, why stop there?
I am always happy to come on. They're great conversations.
They're great conversations.
Thank you.
They aren't really podcasts. They're just conversations that we could coincidentally air for other people to listen to. And I always have to extend my thanks to the man that really makes this possible for me. I think. I will always just air my fucked up opinions anyway. But you're the Alan Moore from the South. You hit people with tennis rackets. I'm sure you protest. You have the gift of you have the gift to gab, the gift to write, the gift to music, and I think it's nice to do this again. And we're going to do an episode very soon with another friend of the cast, the fourth person in the band, Rachel, and we're going to talk about how to become a writer, or what you think people should know if they want to become a writer. In reality, your advice is supposed to be no. That's what you told me when I asked. But that might be a personal comment as well. Anyway, I will thank people here, and we will see you all around.
Thank you as well. Thank you as well, Carl. And thank you, Vincent. It is always wonderful, Victor.
People do that all the time. I don't mind.
It is always wonderful talking with you all, and to anyone who's still listening, thank you very much for listening. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. As always, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you as well.
See you all around. Woo!